WFLA Now will begin momentarily. WFLA Now will begin momentarily. Live on WFLA Now, this is Hey JB. Here's JB Buno.
Former South Carolina attorney Alex Murdoch found guilty of murdering his wife, Maggie, and his son, Paul, mere hours into the deliberation phase of the double murder trial that has spanned the last month in the low country of South Carolina. This morning, sentencing, but before that, your reaction, your questions answered here on WFLA Now. Good morning from the Stream Center, folks. JB here with you, launching live across all platforms on WFLA Now. We're live on Facebook Live, YouTube Live, TikTok as well as WFLA.com, the WFLA app where you can read the latest on Alex Murdoch. Let's bring in our guest, our featured guest for this stream, Peter Tragos, the lawyer you know right here in the Tampa Bay area. Peter, you and I were texting a bit last night back and forth, getting ready for an entire day of Verdict Watch coverage on Friday, that being today. We didn't get to Verdict Watch coverage on Friday because it was all wrapped up past 5 o'clock, the normal 5 o'clock hour when they usually send the jury home for the night. And we have this verdict of guilty on all counts. Good morning to you. First and foremost, your reaction as of last night.
Morning, JB. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, I mean, I think the most surprising and really the only surprising part about this verdict was how quickly it came down. I think if most people were going to guess, which is always difficult to do when you're dealing with a jury because nobody ever knows what a jury or individual juror is going to do. But we all thought with Friday looming, they weren't going to stay past the weekend. They'd already been there 6 weeks. They were going to come to a decision. It was probably going to be Friday at some point. They didn't ask for dinner. They weren't going to stay till 10 o'clock last night was all the reports. The judge would allow them to stay till 10 o'clock. And then we hear around 6:30 that there's some movement in the courtroom. There was a verdict 2 or 3 hours into deliberation, and it came back with a quick guilty.
We're going to activate some polls here. We want to get your reaction, folks, on screen using hashtag lawyer you know for Peter Tragos, hashtag HeyJB for myself. Peter, when I was looking around the internet for various polls, I was running polls of my own, asking people, there was this belief, this prevailing belief that there was going to be a hung jury. The fact that not only do we have this unanimous verdict, but we have one that comes down so quickly, you being an attorney, what does that inform us, just the public, about what was going on in that deliberation room? Do you think that there was a consensus really early on when they went back there?
So it's interesting, as the public watches more of these trials, it is always surprising to people, especially when we talk about polls or we talk about chat rooms or we talk about YouTube Live or Facebook comments. It is always shocking to the general public that a jury can come to a unanimous decision, which happens in just about every case in just about every jurisdiction. Hung juries are very rare. They do happen, and it wouldn't have surprised me if this was a case where it happened because there's so much talk about influence and power and who you know, and this is the type of place where it's the good old boys, and you hear some of the facts surrounding Alex Murdoch's life and you're like, how does that happen? How does this guy get police lights in his private vehicle? So nothing would have shocked me, as we talked about before the show started, in this trial. But the fact that it was this quick, this unanimous, this early on in the day on Thursday tells me that they made up their mind a long time ago. Nobody's mind was changed in closing. And I think it came down to the generally bad guy rule is what I call it. When you have this much to pile on top of one defendant, it is very, very difficult for jurors, for people that are just in the general public and lay people, to acquit somebody they know has stolen millions and millions of dollars of people dying with cancer, with catastrophic injuries, their friends, their family members. And then you find out he faked a suicide attempt to try to get money for his son. And you hear about all the lies, all the deceit, all the other bad acts. I think it's really hard for them to overcome that and say, you know what, we're going to say not guilty for this crime when we think he's capable of just about anything.
I have a ton of questions to ask you, as well as I'm sure our audience has a lot of questions as well. But 9:30 a.m., folks, we are here live from the courtroom. This is the live courtroom feed. We are going to be going to the courtroom right at 9:30, or when we have action on this shot, when, of course, we have the judge deliver a sentence for the again, Alex Murdaugh being found guilty on all counts. So, Peter, would you agree, just really quickly off the top here, would you agree that there wasn't one piece of damning evidence in this trial?
I think the investigation was horrible. I think they missed so much evidence and opportunities to gather and test evidence that it is a bit scary that someone can get convicted on so little. But I think it came down to the kennel video. He was there, the last one with him alive, the first one to see him after it happened. And I think it was a big mistake for him to take the stand for what I think was against the advice of counsel, because when your defense theory is there's not enough evidence, they can't prove it, they didn't prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, and that's what you want to hammer. If your client gets up on the stand and the jury thinks he's a liar and they think at this point he's lying about everything, now it's over. And I think that's when the case ended for Alex Murdaugh.
So that's very fascinating to me. Are you suggesting that had Alex Murdaugh not taken the stand in his own defense, we might not have had a unanimous verdict in this case, or it would have at least extended longer? Would there have been more uncertainty?
The two things I think that ultimately sunk Alex Murdaugh in this case, I think, were the other bad acts evidence. The fact that the judge let in every time he stole money from a sick or dying client who was a friend, a family friend, stealing from the firm, stealing from his brother, stealing from everyone he loved and knew without a care in the world for all of them. The fact that they were able to get into all of that, and then that he would set up a fake suicide with his drug dealer, lets you know he's capable of anything. So that's number one. And number two, I think him taking the stand and again telling more lies. I think the state did a good job of pointing out even some things that were insignificant. He still lied about looking this jury in the eye because he's a lying liar who lies, which is what the state was arguing to them. Those were the two key pieces to me that I think the jury was just like, we're done. I think they were over it at closing arguments. They were like, just sit down. We already know what we're doing.
Wow. So we're going to get to your hashtag HeyJB, hashtag lawyer, questions and comments. But when it comes down to Creighton Waters, the prosecution in this case, it broke it down to means, to motive, to opportunity. There wasn't that one piece of evidence in this case, Peter, what I was trying to get to is that there wasn't that piece of forensics or something that is, rises to the top and is, at the forefront of everyone's minds where you go, oh my goodness, that you can point to very easily, something very tangible that's easy to point to suggest, okay, this person is guilty. It was the summation of a lot of different pieces, apparently, that came together for the jury. So is this the verdict? This is the final question, then we're going to get to some comments. Is this the verdict that you were expecting?
If I was going to put money on it, my verdict or my money would have always been on guilty as soon as the other bad acts evidence came in. Myself, if I was on the jury, I would have voted not guilty personally. I don't think the state proved it. I think if there was that one piece of evidence that people are going to point to, and probably a lot of people in the comments and on other platforms are saying it's the kennel video just minutes before the state said was the time of death, even though it wasn't the coroner, the medical examiner, or any official piece of evidence telling us the time of death, but instead when they stopped using their cell phones, basically is how we determine time of death in this case.
Yeah, interesting. And also too, this was a case that was filled with, you and I were talking pre-stream about how expect the unexpected, and that might lean into today. We don't know exactly how this sentence is going to be delivered. We'll talk more about that in a couple of minutes, but expect the unexpected, from Alex Murdaugh taking the stand to admitting that he was a liar, to the bomb threat, having to forcing the evacuation of the courthouse itself, to my goodness, a juror being dismissed right at the end of this trial. Expect the unexpected Let's go to some of the comments you can use. Either you see it there on the yellow stripes underneath our names on the left and right side of your screens. Hashtag lawyer, hashtag HeyJB. If you use either one of those two hashtags with your comment, we can animate your comment on screen. Kat wants to know the issue I have of convicting without evidence just because he's a bad guy and he lied. Do they not stop and think about the fact that they could possibly be setting a killer free? I'm not trying to follow.
So
exactly
I think I think what the question's coming to is he's not the real killer. So the real killer is still out there. And I think what the state did to ease the jury's mind there is when Alec Murdoch left, even if he said it was at 8:46 or 8:47 or whatever, just a few minutes before the deaths, he didn't see anybody. Nobody else was there. So I think they're pretty confident that if somebody did this, it was Alec Murdoch. There was nobody else around, nobody else that could have done it. If, again, they believe the time of death based on the cell phone usage.
As far as the defense's case, we've been talking so much about the prosecution making their case and winning. As far as the defense and the defense trying to paint this picture of Alex Murdoch being a loving father and someone who would never do this to his wife and child, and somebody who was going through a lot at his time, but really for him at his core, it was always down to family. How about this? We've done this on previous streams, Peter. We're going to do this again. I'm going to give you an opportunity to give a letter grade to the defense and to the prosecution. Let's start with the defense while it's on topic. Give me a letter grade for Harpootlian and really just the defense overall in this case.
I'd give them a solid B. I mean, I think they developed the evidence the best way that they could. I think they had a lot of, it was an uphill battle. Once again, the other bad acts, that wasn't up to the defense. That wasn't up to the state. That was up to the judge. Once that was in, I think they did the best they could dealing with it, telling the jury that he was charged with crimes for all of these lies and all of this theft. He was going to go to prison already for all of that. So just focus on this. But I mean, what can you really do if I give you 99 crimes this person has committed? Are you really going to be the juror to say, not guilty? I think it's tough.
How about, real quick, we have some other comments in the queue with hashtag HeyJB, hashtag lawyer, How about a letter grade for the prosecution in this case?
I mean, again, and this is kind of, this is one where it could be kind of a sliding scale. I mean, if you want to say their job is to convict somebody, I give them an A. They got in the other bad acts. They had all of that evidence. They really hammered it home. I don't think they ever should have brought these murder charges. If I was a prosecutor on this case, I would have been like, there is just not enough evidence to charge and go to trial and use taxpayer dollars to try to convict Alec Murdoch of this. We have a boatload of evidence that we can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt, not beyond a reasonable doubt, that he committed 90 plus financial crimes that are going to put him in prison for the rest of his life. That's where I would have focused my attention to get justice. I do not think this is how it should be in any jurisdiction across the United States, that with this evidence or lack thereof, we're going to convict people of double homicides.
I find that very interesting, but don't, in your estimation though, don't Maggie and Paul still deserve justice, even though semantics, you could argue that Alex Murdoch is without these murder charges, based on the evidence that has been collected and based on what we have learned at this trial, that he would likely be spending the rest of his life behind bars because of just the amount of scheming and financial crimes that he is said to have committed. Don't Paul and Maggie deserve justice? And isn't that what it's about for the state attorney's office?
Absolutely, 100%. I agree with you. And where the justice was lost, in my opinion, was on June 7th when the investigation was so lax. Yeah. The way they searched the house, the way they didn't look for fingerprints, the way they didn't take DNA testing from the victims' bodies. They never really searched for the guns around the property. They never searched for the clothes that are now this big linchpin in the prosecution's case, when all along they thought it was the white t-shirt and the shorts that, mistakenly they thought had blood spatter on them. That's where the justice was screwed up for Maggie and Paul, not, in my opinion, during this actual case or prosecution. And again, to me, the better and the better legal route to take would have been to convict him on the financial crimes. If people had their suspicions and people wanted to say they think he was responsible for this, they were at liberty to do that. This is just the way that I look at it, is prosecutors are supposed to be fighting for justice, not convictions. But I mean, people can say, hey, listen, they did it. They had enough evidence to convince this jury. And that's how our system is in place. And I respect the verdict.
And real quick, why do you think, in your opinion now, again, why do you think that the law enforcement, the evidence gathering component to this case, why do you think it was so flawed?
And I've heard theories, right? I've heard that SLED wanted to protect Alec Murdoch, that law enforcement did a bad job because he is who he is. Well, guess what? You blew it then. If that's why you did it, you were making bad decisions. You were in bed with the devil, and this is what happens. And again, to go back on it and try to turn it around is not what our criminal justice system is about. It's not what it's built on. We have to do things, and it's not about Alec Murdoch, right? It's just generally a bad guy, right? I mean, we heard all of the crimes that he admits to committing. He's an admitted liar. And I think it's not necessarily about Alec Murdoch when I look at this. It's about a lot of other people out there that might not have the resources or the time to fight it the way that he does, or the backing of law enforcement. And if this is all it takes, basically, to me, it says if the AG charges you with something, you're going to prison for it and you're getting convicted for it. So I think that's part of what we have to keep in mind. Again, notwithstanding, I don't think the jury did anything wrong. Based on the evidence they saw, which some of it maybe shouldn't have come in, maybe should have come in. We're going to find that out on appeal. Based on the evidence they saw, they came down with a resounding, unanimous, guilty verdict, and I totally respect it. And at this point, he is a convicted murderer of his wife and of his son.
Peter Tragos, the lawyer you know, JB Buno here with you live on WFLA now. About 5 or so minutes until 9:30 Eastern time. We'll be listening in for the sentence for Alex Murdoch after he was found guilty on all counts, guilty of murdering his wife and his son. Back here with you live. Let's really focus in on comments for the next 5 minutes and try to get to as many as we can with hashtag HeyJB, hashtag Peter Tragos. We'll try to go rapid fire here, Peter, as best we can. Allison says, hashtag HeyJB, how does this correlate with the new documentary? Do you think it's a coincidence it came out before trial? I can speak to this from a media perspective, but Peter, maybe you could really quickly talk about this just from an exposure standpoint and just how much fanfare there was regarding this trial with the documentaries that came out beforehand.
I've got a lot of thoughts on this. I haven't watched any of the documentaries at this point. I didn't want them to come into how I would look at this case, and I'm going to watch them later and try to figure out why certain things didn't come into trial, because the jury should not have known what's in the documentaries when making their decision. So it really shouldn't come into play onto whether or not we think he's guilty of these charges. And I'll say, we generally, as the public, like watching stuff like this. It's entertaining for us to watch documentaries like this, but I think it is going to create problems. And I think we're already seeing it in other cases where the judges are going to limit cameras in the courtroom. They're going to limit media in the courtroom because there's too much hype around it. There's too much discussion, and there's too much, potential influence on the internet with these documentaries. So I think we do have to be careful. If we want to see what actually happens in the courtrooms in our country, we have to be careful about also watching documentaries that do not have the same rules and protections in place, and they can just throw all sorts of stuff in front of us, cut a certain way to prove a specific point.
And it's happened all the time with previous documentaries, and that's why you will hear so much come out in the aftermath of a documentary being put out there about how somebody felt like, oh, they cut out this soundbite, or, oh, they skipped over this portion of my interview. And it's a summation of an, you can't put out the entire interview out there. And if you did, of course, I watched the documentaries, and I did it so that I have a better understanding of the lens in which the public at large was viewing this trial. It was just more for me as an opportunity to get a better understanding of how the public at large was going to be viewing Alex Murdoch and all the other parties attached to the case. And as far as, do you think it's a coincidence it came out before trial? Of course it's not. It's all of course part of ratings and getting as much publicity as possible. Everything is about timing. And so the HBO Max documentary came out months ago. The one with Netflix, actually, I'm surprised it took as long to come out as it did. But quite frankly, I think that this is a sign of what's to come. I think with major trials in the future, I think that documentaries are going to look to strike while the iron is hot, so to speak. And I think that this is going to continuously happen in the future when it comes to just how much attention certain trials get. A few minutes to go here before, if there's any action on this shot right here, folks, if we see anything, of course, we're going to go over to it live and pay as close attention to it as possible. We'll put up audio full. I want to also point out that our Facebook Live and YouTube Live poll results are all around the same We asked, do you agree with the jury's verdict? And it's in the low 80s, around 82 to 84%. It's hovering back and forth. Believe that the jury got the verdict right. Look, that's somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 in 10, depending on how the actual options for the poll were distributed. It's about 1 in 10 that don't agree with the jury's verdict. But of course, it all comes down to that unanimous verdict, you guys. Let's go into Michelle's comment, #KJB. I have reasonable doubt. I think poor people are railroaded into plea deals all the time. It's not right. Okay, that's one comment here from Michelle. Let's go to some others. It only populates on my screen if it's got one of the hashtags. Let's go to Scooter, #KJB. Can he appeal, Peter?
Yes, absolutely. And you got to expect that. His attorneys were protecting the record throughout the entire case. I think the number one issue on appeal is going to be those other bad acts and whether or not they were used as propensity evidence, meaning, well, if he did that, he's more likely to have done this, which is an improper way to use that evidence as opposed to motive. Was that financial, covering up the financial crimes? Was that the motive for the murders? And credibility. He was lying then. Did he lie on the stand? You're allowed to use it for those reasons, but not for propensity that he'd be more likely to commit this crime.
Is there any doubt in your mind, Peter, look, whatever the sentence is today, and we'll talk, maybe we can go over really quickly what what the possibilities for the sentence are. But is there any doubt in your mind that he is spending the rest of his life behind bars, even if there was an appeal, even if the appeal was to find some minute flaw in the system that leads to that verdict getting tossed out? We're talking about 90 plus other charges that are looming here. So is there any doubt in your mind?
No doubt. I mean, he literally admitted to 90 plus financial crimes on the stand under oath. He's going to prison forever, but I do think his last thing that he's going to care about is getting cleared for the murders of his wife and son. So I think that's where he's going to put his attention, is towards this appeal. It doesn't make a practical difference about where he's going to be the rest of his life.
Peter, so as far as now that the time is now 9:31, there's been no action on this shot, folks. We'll put this up now in the center of our screen. There's been no action on this yet. What are you expecting? Let me just kind of get your preview as to what you expect from the judge as far as the sentence this morning.
Based on the judge's comments throughout the trial, and especially after the verdict was rendered, that there was a lot of evidence. It only pointed to one verdict, and that's the verdict the jury came back with. I think Murdaugh's looking at 30 years to life. I think he's absolutely going to get life, multiple life sentences. I think the judge is going to throw the max at him. He's limited with some of the enhancements he can do, because once you get life, there's only so much you can do. But I think he's going to get multiple life sentences here. Whatever the max the judge can give him, I think is what he's going to do.
Venus, #KJB, why isn't the death penalty on the table?
They did not decide to bring the death penalty for this case. So they do have the death penalty in South Carolina. The AG's office was not seeking the death penalty in this case. They were seeking life without parole. That's what I think he's going to get.
Before we're gonna take questions for as long as we can up until we actually have the sentencing phase begin here. As you know, we get started here this Friday morning, March 3rd. Before we do that, though, before we get on to some more questions, a big thank you to Peter Tragos for spending part of his morning with us here on stream. Go give him a follow at The Lawyer You Know. He is Peter. How many breakdowns of Murdoch have you done over the last month? Lost count?
Every night, literally every night after trial's over, we do a recap. We answer some questions, and it gets fiery sometimes. My polls were mostly 2/3 thinking he was guilty, 1/3 thinking either not guilty or a hung jury type. So it was always leaning guilty. But I think there were some issues with the evidence gathering and the investigation. But every night we broke down what happened in court and talked about it afterwards. And that's what I'm going to do for the trials we focus on kind of going forward.
Tempe wants to know, #KJB, what is the motive? Make it make sense. So the motive that was established in this case, and you can add some color here, Peter, if you'd like, is that Alex Murdoch was allegedly trying to distract from the financial crimes and the evidence that was building up against him for the scheming that he has done over the years. Correct, Peter?
Yeah, I mean, I personally think a better motive, that is the state's motive, that he was trying to cover up or distract from the financial crimes and kind of make them go away, which didn't work. It delayed it for like a couple weeks. But then they also talked about greed and his family name and not wanting to be embarrassed and to avoid shame because his family has such deep roots there. So they kind of added some to the financial crimes motive. To me, that all makes more sense than the financial crimes motive. He snapped, it was something to do with his addiction. That all makes a lot more sense to me than the financial crimes, which it didn't really even help there. And I don't see how Maggie and Paul being the targets help the financial crimes as much as a lot of other people that were breathing down his neck with that stuff.
Looking into some final comments here before I think that we're about to get started here. There's clearly some activity in the courtroom. Courtney, #HJB, why do so many people say they think he's guilty, but the jury would be hung? Jury was highly underestimated. They know better than any of us. The jury has spoken. I think there's some recency bias here, because with Parkland and with the death penalty trial for the Parkland school shooter, there was this prevailing certainty, almost 100% certainty, that there was going to be a unanimous verdict in that case. The death penalty was going to be the fate for the Parkland school shooter, and just one juror said no. Death penalty is off the table, and that's all that it took. Remember, all it takes is one juror to be stubborn and say, I'm not listening to anybody else in the room. This is how I feel, and this is my decision. That's all it takes, and then all of a sudden you don't have a unanimous verdict or a unanimous decision, Peter.
Yeah, I mean, in this case, I do agree with this comment. Most people in most chats were saying guilty, but you never know what a jury is going to do. And I think that's the point. There have been surprise verdicts. There have been surprise hung juries before. So you never know what they're going to do, but the good money was always on guilty in this case. The good money in any trial is always on guilty because the state has the evidence and they determine whether or not they want to file charges and go to trial on this. The defendant doesn't choose. It's up to the state.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think that there might have been a lot of folks out there who had really watched the trial and watched it at a very granular level and really was micro-focused on it. And there were so many people who felt that guilty was going to be the verdict, but again, just maybe it was just this fear that there was going to be some lack of agreement there from the juror. I think that was a reason why we saw so many polls and so many people saying it was going to be a hung jury, because again, all it takes is one. 11 can be all in unanimous agreement and one can be the outlier, and before you know it, you have a hung jury. Looking at some final comments here, there's clearly action in the courtroom. I think people are just now filing in. A lot of people are just asking about Buster and about Buster's future now, Peter. Buster, of course, being the surviving son who did testify in this case. Peter, what's your opinion on Buster going forward now?
It's incredibly sad for him and for the rest of the family. I mean, he literally has lost everyone in his family now. He seems like either didn't believe or didn't want to believe that his dad did this or his dad was capable of this. He does have other family members from his mom's side and his dad's side still to hopefully provide that support for him. But there's no way around how difficult this must be for him, how sad this must be for him. A lot of people are waiting to see, is he going to speak on Alex's behalf? Is he going to speak as a victim, giving an impact statement during the sentencing? So there's, again, still some more unknowns as it comes to sentencing, but there's no other way to look at it, but it's devastating for Buster at this point.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see, because you know that every media outlet in the country is going to be inquiring as to whether or not Buster would be willing to do an interview and tell his side of the story outside of what he told on the stand, his reaction and how he feels about his father being convicted of the murders of Buster's mother and brother, Paul, his mother, Maggie. So a lot of questions that I'm seeing here in our comment section about Buster. And Buster, what was your take on Buster's reaction? I know that some live streams last night had a split screen showing Buster's reaction right alongside Alex's reaction. It looked well. You know what, Peter? I'll let you kind of give your 2 cents on it.
I think, to me, I know what we do in situations like this. I know what my dad does in situations like this. My guess is the defense attorneys told everybody, be stoic, regardless of what the verdict is. It's probably not a good verdict. When it came back this quick, I think they all knew it was guilty. I think they were all prepared. I don't think they wanted some big outburst in the courtroom, and I think that's kind of what it looked like. Buster, at this point, it's hard to even tell what he's thinking. whether it's him on the stand or sitting throughout the entire trial, he really never showed a lot of emotion. And it's just hard to think of what somebody would be thinking or doing if they were in his situation.
I find it very interesting that Alex himself did not get emotional. Stoic is, I think, a good word used to describe just the look on his face, perhaps a little bit of disbelief also written on his face as well. You have somebody who has admitted to scheming people out of their money. You have somebody who has admitted on the stand saying that, in fact, that he was a liar. It really calls into question, makes you look back at Alex's emotions over the course of the trial. There were some moments, some shots where he was tears running down his face. I mean, extremely distraught and upset. And it really calls in everything with Alex Murdaugh now. You can call into question the authenticity of his of his reactions. What do you make of how genuine his emotions were over the course of this trial? The crying, the sobbing, the just the visible emotions that we saw.
This is where it's hard to separate being a lawyer versus being a layperson or more likely to be on the jury, because myself, I felt like he was a liar. I didn't put as much stock in him testifying. I actually found it hard to believe that he would do this to his family based on the state's witnesses and the explanation of people that were there all the time, that knew them, even Maggie's sister, that they had a good relationship. He loved them. Paul was the apple of his eye. So to me, it makes no sense. But I think we have to realize that a lot of what he did makes no sense. As a personal injury lawyer, I cannot fathom how you could possibly steal millions of dollars from these people that we work with, that hire us, that trust us. I can't tell you how many clients say to me, do whatever you think is best. And for him to take that and steal their money makes no sense to me. So a lot of what he did makes no sense. That's not supposed to come into the jury's mind. And I think at the end of the day, he sat up there, they didn't believe him, and they convicted him.
JB Buno, Peter Tragos, the lawyer you know. The time is now 10 after the scheduled start time. So we clearly see there's activity in the courtroom. People are filing in. So this is going to begin any moment. In the aftermath, Peter's going to be hopping off, I know, to do what he does best, of course. But what we're going to be doing here after the sentencing is we're going to be getting more reaction from you, our audience. So if you're watching here on WFLA Now, on whatever platform you're watching, stick around after the sentencing. We'll be going to your comments, your questions as well. Things picking up. Peter, thank you for your time. The very latest on WFLA.com. Let's listen in.
Thanks, JB.
Good morning. Parties ready to proceed?
State's ready, Your Honor. Bench is ready, Your Honor.
All right, from the state, Mr. Waters.
Thank you, Your Honor. We're obviously here in the sentencing for the state versus Richard Alexander Murdoch. Your Honor, I have prepared the sentencing sheets signed up. If I can hand those up to the clerk. Your Honor, very quickly, the defendant has no prior record, and the state has no victim impact people who want to speak at this time. But I will address the court briefly. And I don't need, Your Honor, to repeat the evidence that Your Honor just heard for the past 6 weeks, but it is overwhelming, and it shows this man to be a cunning manipulator, a man who placed himself above all others, including his family. A man who violated the trust of so many, including his friends, his family, his partners, his profession, but most of all, Maggie and Paul. This is a very complicated situation, and I want to offer my condolences to the family that has suffered here. We have tried very hard to be respectful and sensitive regardless of what position any person took, because this family has suffered and they've had to suffer in the public eye, and I want to offer my condolences to this family. I want to offer it for Maggie and Paul and Mr. Randolph too, who I had the pleasure of working with on one occasion. But the reality remains is that despite all this attention, this case is about Maggie Murdoch and Paul Murdoch, and I'm so thankful that the jurors gave them a voice. You heard about Paul. Obviously, there was the boat case, but you also heard him described as a fun-loving young man, a person who loved life, a person who would do anything for his friends, for anyone. And he's cut down as he was just starting to live his life. You heard about Maggie. You heard how sweet she was. You heard that she was a girl's girl who adapted to the outdoorsman life of her sons, how much she loved her sister and her brother-in-law and their children, and she was cut down in the prime of her life. Both of them, like everyone else, was unaware of who he really was. No one who thought they knew this man, no one who thought they were close to this man knew who he really was. And, Your Honor, that's chilling. And I've looked in his eyes, and he liked to stare me down as he would walk by me during this trial. And I could see the real Alex Murdoch when he looked at me. The depravity, the callousness, the selfishness of these crimes are stunning. The lack of remorse and the effortless way in which he lies, including here sitting right over there in this witness stand. Your Honor, a man like that, a man like this man, should never be allowed to be among free, law-abiding citizens again. And I would submit to you that the only just sentence here to give justice for Maggie and Paul is the maximum, and that would be 2 consecutive life sentences. Thank you, Your Honor.
You indicate that no victim would like to speak at this time. Would any victim like to speak at any time during these proceedings?
Your Honor, one of the things we did early on, obviously, as I just said, it's a very complicated situation, but we made the decision early on. We've had our victim advocate here who's been doing a wonderful job, regardless of the viewpoints of any individual family member, to provide aid and service to them, and we made that decision. I'm informed by our victim advocate that none of them wish to speak. The defense can certainly address that, but that's what I am informed. But they certainly were offered the opportunity as is required, and I want to commend our victim advocate on the excellent job she did in handling this complex situation that we wanted to be sensitive to, because again, none of us are not mindful of the fact of the suffering of this family.
I know that SLED Chief Mark Keel is here. Would you like to address the court on any matters, Chief?
No, sir. Just to say, again, very proud of our agents, the work they've done. I'm proud of the partnership that we've had with the Attorney General's office as we've had for many years. And again, we're here to see the justice is served, and we believe it has been.
Thank you. For the defense.
Your Honor, Mr. Griffin and I would have no comment. The defendant would like to address the court, though.
Mr. Murdoch.
Good morning, Your Honor. I'm innocent. I would never hurt my wife, Maggie, and I would never hurt my son, Paul.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Anything further?
I don't think further comment is necessary, Your Honor. Thank you.
Mr. Murdoch, if you'll come before the court for sentencing. This has been perhaps one of the most troubling cases, not just for me as a judge, for the state, for the defense team, but for all of the citizens in this community, all the citizens in this state, and as we've seen based on the media coverage throughout the nation. You have a wife who's been killed, murdered, a son savagely murdered, a lawyer, a person from a respected family who has controlled justice in this community for over a century, a person whose grandfather's portrait hang at the back of the courthouse that I had to have ordered removed in order to ensure that a fair trial was had by both the state and the defense. And I've sat through the trial. Not only have I sat through the trial, but also as the presiding judge of the state grand jury, sat through and participated in the issuance of search warrants of various sorts, bond hearings, and have had to consider many things. And we have this case, and I'm also assigned to preside over 99 others, at least 99 other cases. Though testimony has come up regarding many of those other cases, I will not make any comment with regard to any other pending matter, as I have been assigned those cases as well. It's also particularly troubling, Mr. Murdoch, because as a member of the legal community and a well-known member of the legal community, you've practiced law before me, and we've seen each other at various occasions throughout the years. And it was especially heartbreaking for me to see you go in the media from being a grieving father who lost a wife and a son to being the person indicted and convicted of killing them. And you've engaged in such duplicitous conduct here in the courtroom, here on the witness stand, and as established by the testimony throughout the time leading from the time of the indictment and prior to the indictment throughout the trial to this moment in time. Certainly, you have no obligation to say anything other than saying not guilty. And obviously, as appeals are probably expected or absolutely expected, I would not expect a confession of any kind. In fact, as I've presided over murder cases over the past 22 years, I have yet to find a defendant who could go there, who could go back to that moment in time when they decided to pull the trigger or to otherwise murder someone. I have not been able to get anyone, any defendant, even those who have confessed to being guilty, to go back and explain to me what happened at that moment in time when they opted to pull the trigger, when they opted to commit the most heinous crimes known to man. In this case, qualifies under our death penalty statute. based on the statutory aggravating circumstances of 2 or more people being murdered by the defendant by one act or pursuant to one scheme or course of conduct. I don't question at all the decision of the state not to pursue the death penalty. But as I sit here in this courtroom and look around the many portraits of judges and other court officials and reflect on the fact that over the past century, your family, including you, have been prosecuting people here in this courtroom, and many have received the death penalty, probably for lesser conduct. Remind me of the expression you gave on the witness stand. Was it tangled?
Tangled web, we weave.
Oh, what tangled web we weave. What did you mean by that?
It meant when I lied, I continue to lie.
And the question is, when will it end? When will it end? And it's ended already for the jury because they've concluded that you continued to lie and lied throughout your testimony. And perhaps with all the throng of people here, they, for the most part, all believe, or 80, 90%, 99% believe that you continue to lie now when your statement of denial to the court. Perhaps you believe that it does not matter, that there's nothing that can mitigate a sentence given the crimes that were committed. You know, a notice of alibi was filed in this case by counsel in November, and we conducted a hearing, pretrial hearing, in which you claimed to have been someplace else at the time the crime was committed. Then, after all of the witnesses placed you at the scene of the crime, at the last minute, or last minutes or days, you switch courses and admitted to being there. And then that necessitated more lies and continued to lie. And I said, where will it end? It's already ended for many who have heard you and concluded that it'll never end. But within your own soul, you have to deal with that. And I know you have to see Paul and Maggie during the night times when you're attempting to go to sleep. I'm sure they come and visit you. I'm sure.
All day and every night.
Yeah, I'm sure. And they will continue to do so. And reflect on the last time they looked you in the eyes, as you looked the jury in the eyes. I don't know person who's always been such a gregarious, friendly person can cause your life to be tangled in such a weave web, such a situation that yours have spun into, and it's so unfortunate because you had such a lovely family of such friendly people, including you, and to go from that to this. your license to practice law has been stripped away from you. You turned from lawyer to witness, and now have an opportunity to make your final appeal as an ex-lawyer. And it's it's really surprising that you're waiving this right at this time. And if you opt to do so, it's on you. You're not compelled to say anything, but you have the opportunity to do so.
Judge, I tell you again, I respect this court, but I'm innocent. I would never, under any circumstances, hurt my wife, Maggie, and I would never, under any circumstances, hurt my son, Paul.
Well, and it might not have been you. It might have been the monster you become when you take 15, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 opioid pills. Maybe you become another person. I've seen that before. The person standing before me was not the person who committed the crime, though it's the same individual. We'll leave that at that. Before announcing sentence on these cases, with regard to all of the other pending cases, are any of them here in Colleton, or I'm sure some of them are?
Yes, sir.
Half of them, or?
I don't have that in front of me, but there are a substantial number of charges here. There's some in Hampton, Orangeburg, Beaufort, Allendale. There may be others that I'm not thinking of right now.
We might have worn out our welcome here in Colleton. They have been, and I'll take this opportunity to thank Sheriff Hill and all of the court officials and really everyone I've met and dealt with while here in Colleton County. Just been great. But without any delay, we're going to schedule some of the other matters. I know Mr. Harpootlian's scheduling is complicated, and you've sacrificed quite a bit to be able to be here defending Mr. Murdaugh, as well as the Attorney General's office, with all the other many things and obligations you have. And to be able to have the Attorney General here, Alan Wilson, for the period of time that he's devoted to being here along with everyone else, it's been quite a sacrifice. But there are other victims whose cases deserve to be heard. And this case has jumped some of those other cases. Perhaps jumped it because of this case resulting in an assault on the integrity of the judicial system in our state, law enforcement in our state. Even during this trial, the law enforcement have been maligned for the past 5 or 6 weeks by one who had access to the wheels of justice, to be able to deflect the investigation. And as the evidence is pointed out in this case, the looming storm that Mr. Waters talked about, I can just imagine on that day, June 7th, when a lawyer is confronted and confesses to having stolen over $500,000 from a client, And he has a tiger like Mark Tinsley on his tail, pursuing discovery in the case involving the death of Mallory Beach, and having a father, for the most part, on his deathbed. I could imagine, or really can't imagine, but I know it had to have been quite a bit going through your mind on that day. But amazingly, to have you come and testify that it was just another ordinary day, that my wife and son and I were out just enjoying life. Not credible, not believable. You can convince yourself about it, but obviously you have the inability to convince anyone else about that. So if you made any such arguments as a lawyer, you would lose every case like that. Cases you will never have an opportunity to argue anymore, except perhaps your own as you sit in the Department of Corrections. Anything further?
No, sir.
All right, Mr. Murdaugh, I sentence you to the State Department of Corrections on each of the murder indictments in the murder of your wife, Maggie Murdaugh. I sentence you for a term of the rest of your natural life for the murder of Paul Murdoch, whom you probably love so much. I sentence you to prison for murdering him for the rest of your natural life. Those sentences will run consecutive. Under the statute involving possession of a weapon during a violent crime, there is no sentence where a life sentence is imposed on other indictments. That is the sentence of the court, and you are remanded to the State Department of Corrections. And officers may carry forth on the imposition. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Judge Newman giving the max of 2 consecutive life sentences. Those life sentences for the murders of Maggie Murdoch, Paul Murdoch, here in South Carolina. As attorneys for both sides approach Judge Newman for a sidebar. All audio in the courtroom is currently down. We're going to be getting to your reaction. A bit of a lengthy sentencing portion of the day here as far as Judge Newman's remarks, approximately 18, 19 or so minutes in total. As you see here, the attorneys for both sides talking with Judge Newman. Court has not yet been dismissed. After court is dismissed, again, we'll get to your reaction and whether or not you agree with the sentence that was given here by Judge Newman. Again, 2 consecutive life in prison sentences, 1 for Maggie, 1 for Paul.
Before we adjourn, an order was issued concerning maintaining the juror's identity being anonymous. And that order was issued, and for the most part, it's been complied with, except for the jury leaving the courtroom yesterday, or not the jury, but the defendant leaving the courtroom while the jury is still seated. Protecting the identity of the jurors is certainly extremely important during the course of a trial to ensure that no one makes contact with the jury or attempts to influence the jury. Jurors have a right to continue that privacy beyond their jury service, but they're not obligated to do so. And it would not surprise me if jurors choose to come forward and to speak, and they're encouraged to do so if that is their desire. I have no problem whatsoever with the jurors unmasking themselves and speaking freely with the media, because they have undergone a life-changing experience as it relates to many of them. And some of them are here now, and I want them to know that should anyone attempt to harass them or annoy them, please let me know and I will address the issue. Secondly, there's a complaint now regarding the posting of autopsy photographs or photos that came from within the courtroom. It's based on the direction of the photographs. It did not come from the audience. It came somehow from within the well of the court. The parties have requested an investigation of that. I have my hands full doing my job, and I don't attempt to conduct any investigations beyond the conducting of a trial, but to the extent that law enforcement decides to review that, that's would be a responsibility of law enforcement. Yes. And of course, one of the reasons we've sought to seal graphic photos is because the parties have a right to privacy and a right to those matters not being publicly disclosed. If anyone has heard about the recent settlement that Kobe Bryant's, another sports analogy, Kobe Bryant's wife just made with Los Angeles County and others out there over certain disclosures of information involving the death of Kobe Bryant. Liability can be substantial, and it's a risk for the most part that's not worth taking. So we'll let everyone judge themselves accordingly with that regard. Aside from all that, our business is done here in Colleton County, and I get to use my gavel one or few times during this trial and order that court be adjourned. Sine die.
All rise.
Some applause in the courtroom for Judge Clifton Newman. Breaking news here on WFLA.
Breaking news on WFLA now. Here's J.B. Buno.
Disgraced South Carolina attorney Alex Murdoch is sentenced to 2 consecutive life in prison sentences for the murders of his wife, Maggie. His son, Paul, will go live here to the courtroom and show you some of the folks that are now filing out. We'll, of course, attempt to get access to any cameras outside of the courtroom, outside of the courthouse itself, or any press conferences that take place. You can see Harpootlian and Waters here. They're talking, shaking hands. Clearly, a lot of mutual respect on both sides. What these really respective legal teams have been through over the course of the last year plus. dealing with this and preparing for its conclusion. The conclusion has arrived. Alex Murdaugh has been found guilty and will spend the rest of his life in prison. Of course, will still have to answer to, as we heard there, 99 other charges related to financial crimes, financial scheming that led to Alex Murdaugh being able to live the life that he did, accumulate the wealth that he did. But that, of course, will be handled in the many, many years ahead as those individual trials are scheduled in South Carolina. So just looking here at really the last time that all these folks will be inside this courtroom. We're going to get into your questions, your comments, your reaction. People have been asking, will there be an appeal? What happens next for Buster Murdaugh? What happens now with the mountain of pending litigation for all the families that Alex Murdaugh is accused and really admitted to swindling out of their money? We'll get into all of that, but really quickly, just a moment to listen in here to the courtroom. I do have audio up full blast. They have muted all courtroom microphones. But if there's any additional feeds from outside of the courtroom here in the Stream Center, we'll be able to bring it up here live and listen in. Judge Newman, for really the first time in this trial, being given the opportunity to really share some of what has been going on in his mind. I've seen questions and comments over the course of this month, people asking what is going through Judge Newman's mind right now as he hears some of the bombshell testimony, as some of the evidence is presented in court. A lot has been made of what might have been going through the mind of Judge Newman. Well, I think we got a little bit of an idea as to what he has been thinking and how he has felt throughout this trial, as he went through quite a bit over nearly 20 minutes of explanation, of just speaking his mind for a bit. As you look here again at some of the attorneys awaiting the access to some other feeds here from outside of the courtroom. You can start to file in your hashtag HeyJB questions and comments. We're going to be spotlighting your reaction. But in the meantime, what we're going to do is we're going to launch new polls on Facebook Live and on YouTube Live. And we're going to ask, do you agree with Judge Newman's sentence? So be on the lookout for that. That is now live on YouTube Live and coming to Facebook Live here momentarily. Give everyone the opportunity to weigh in. The live poll has now been activated on Facebook Live. You should see it pop up on your screen. A lot of handshaking, a lot of, I'm sure, just thank yous, appreciation being shared. A lot goes into a trial of this magnitude. Countless hours of preparation, countless hours of digging through documents, of examining evidence, of preparing and talking to potential witnesses who would be taking the stand, preparing for cross-examination. All of the work that goes into a trial of this magnitude, and to finally have a conclusion here, a resolution. Everyone's just taking an opportunity here one final time while they're in the courtroom here together to just share some of their experiences and what they thought over the course of this process. By the way, did anyone else catch the Carlton County sheriff's employee? I believe it appeared to be a deputy who was shaking his head back and forth during the sentencing while they were zoomed in on a seated Alex Murdaugh. I saw some people commenting about it. I saw it, and I thought that was an interesting moment as a member of law enforcement who is tasked with security inside the courtroom, who was very visible with their opinion as they were going through. I think that they were detailing Alex Murdaugh's pattern of lying and consistent lying. And as that deputy, I believe it to be a deputy or a member of the Carlton County Sheriff's Office, was shaking their head back and forth. That was something that drew my gaze, and I'm sure it drew the gaze of a lot of others as well. As I understand it, members of the media pools, they're getting situated outside, as they did last night as well. Just getting their equipment in place for any final press conferences, any final interview opportunities. And also emphasize how Judge Newman did make, one of the comments that I had in the queue, one of the hashtag HJB comments that I had in the queue here was somebody asking as to whether or not any members of the jury, as we now zoom into the clock, the standard look for court not being active, court not being in session presently. And people were asking if any members of the jury were present. Judge Clifton Newman made it very, very clear as he was looking out in the courtroom. It was very apparent that he was making note of the fact that some of the jurors had come back. They were invited to come back if they saw fit to do so, if they wanted to do so. The jury wasn't seated for the sentencing. That of course isn't how it works. So for sentencing, the jury was excused last night and were finally able to be told that their job is done. And so as far as today, the jury was invited back if they choose to do so, but not without Judge Newman making it very clear last night that none of the jurors are to be harassed, to be approached. And you might wonder how would people know that a jury member was seated and was an actual juror for the trial itself? Well, reporters that were inside the courtroom who might have paid it, or members of the public who saw the faces of the jury, would remember that person. If they were back today, they might get approached for an interview outside the courtroom, which is exactly why Judge Newman wanted to make that clear one more time, was that if a juror was leaving the courtroom and was getting, asked repeatedly or harassed for an interview, that if it was considered harassment by the juror, that it was not to be tolerated. So protecting the jurors, look, they're doing an act of tremendous public service, and you never want to see a juror be outed as far as their identity be made public, or B, be harassed in the aftermath of a trial. And again, we're here in the Stream Center looking up various courtroom feeds. JB here with you live, and we'll of course stay here with you live as we await those courtroom feeds, or courthouse feeds from outside of the courthouse. As well. People who are asking, and I see here from Debbie's comment, and we'll start to get into some of the comments with hashtag HJB. Is there the possibility of parole? No, it's life without the possibility of parole. Now, of course, Alex Murdoch will have the opportunity to appeal. As thorough and as tightly constructed of a case as this was, or appears to have been, the chances of an appeal being successful are likely remote. However, everyone has the right to appeal a court's decision. Alex Murdoch, as he proclaimed his innocence before he stood up at the front of the courtroom and during as well, for an interesting bit of back and forth there, for a bit of courtroom theater, he proclaimed his innocence twice there. Before he stood up at the front and while he was looking directly into the eyes of Judge Newman face to face in that moment. So if Alex Murdoch is going to continue to proclaim his innocence, you can bet your bottom dollar that he's going to launch some form of an appeal. But you would only hope that the appeal process wouldn't distract from. It's very important to remember that there are 99 other pending charges against Alex Murdoch for the financial schemes, the financial crimes that he's accused of committed and really confessed to while on the stand. All the victims of those financial cases, by the way, they deserve their cases to be heard. It's very important that to remember that while the Murdoch family and so many other connected families to the Murdoch family have been impacted, and the Murdoch family has been decimated by this, thoroughly decimated by this, it's important to remember that there are so many other families in South Carolina who have also been severely impacted due to what Alex Murdoch confessed to doing as far as swindling people out of their money. And so if the appeal process you would only hope that that does not take away from the victims who just want their case to be heard. And somebody also asked, I think I lost the comment in the queue. Someone also asked, will Alex Murdoch be present in court to hear and to be a defendant in those cases? Sure, he will in all likelihood be back in court to answer to those charges. Whether or not he pleads guilty or not guilty, given what he has testified to on the stand, that remains to be seen. We will find out. All right, looking for some comments, looking for some questions. I'm going to keep an eye here on feeds here in the Stream Center, looking for any potential feeds that we can tap into. And we'll go, I want to see the poll results as they've come in. About 90% saying that they agree with Judge Newman's max sentence. Stephanie, the opinion of Stephanie, #KJB. There was not enough evidence of murder. I had my doubt, but only later after I had heard all the testimony. There are some out there who will say that they do not believe that the standard was met, that there was enough concrete evidence. But as Peter Tragos, the lawyer mentioned here before the stream, when you add everything up and you add to the amount of story changing that went on, the amount of being caught, not even lying. There's a difference between lying and being caught in your lies. Alex Murdoch got caught in his lies. And when you look at it through a certain prism and you combine all the evidence together, the jury felt that there was enough there that rises to the level, to the criteria necessary to convict somebody of murder. There's going to be people who disagree because it's not black and white, because there wasn't that fingerprint, that one particular piece of blood splatter evidence, or that one piece of forensics that points to 100% certainty. But not every case is going to be black and white in that way. Not every case is going to be a slam door shut. Shona, #KJB. This was interesting. It was very interesting to hear Judge Newman pontificate, if you will, about the death penalty. I wondered, too, if his remarks were prepared. Anyone else think of that while we were watching it? Was he just going off just the top of his head with the entire explanation and really going through his thought process, his remarks? Were they prepared? I mean, I'm sure that in his mind he had been collecting his thoughts, and believe me, he had a lot of time to do so over these last few weeks and since last night. However, was he reading did he have notes on a piece of paper? It was very interesting too that he had mentioned the death penalty, and I'm sure that that's going to be analyzed quite a bit as to whether or not that meant that had the death penalty been on the table, whether or not the judge would have been in favor of the death penalty, whether Judge Newman would have been in favor of the death penalty. As a reminder, the death penalty was not on the table on this case with the charges as they were filed, as they were presented. Get to some other comments. And looking here. Sensory says, hashtag AJB, the judge would have had no problem sentencing him to death. And again, opinion of one of our commenters. It was interesting that Judge Newman had noted that the Murdoch family had been tied to others who had received a sentence of the death penalty for what he described, and I'm paraphrasing here, but what as he described, for lesser crimes or lesser evils. So I think that's why you're seeing comments like this one from Sensory. Sue, hashtag KJB, how long did the jury take to convict? It was hours. Did anybody have an exact count of the amount of hours that it was? It was not very long. And I can just share from a reporter standpoint and from, the media circles that I'm a part of, we were all shocked. Without mentioning any names, there were teams that were preparing for including ourselves, preparing for coverage on Friday and into next week, getting things ready, because it is usually when you have a trial of this length, a trial with so many complexities, a trial with so much to siphon through and figure out, and also too when these jurors are really huddled up for the first time and tasked with all collectively and collaboratively talking about the case for the first time, there's usually so much to go through, and it's usually not done on a trial of this length. Being sorted through on its first day is not that common. It happens. Oh, believe me, it happens. But it usually extends into day 2, day 3. It can depend and it can vary. And it also depends on how the jury sees it and whether or not sometimes there's disagreement and one juror has to be convinced. How often have we heard in previous trials, questions will be posed, a piece of paper, a note will be passed to the judge, and a particular piece of testimony or evidence there will be clarifications necessary. Really, some people saying, 3 hours. Everyone's saying about 3 hours, roughly in the neighborhood of 3 hours. A month of testimony, a month of evidence, a month of each side in this legal battle, if you will. And it came down to 3 hours. It goes to show how certain the jury was. And that's why it's so interesting. So many people who have been talking at great length about whether or not, what is that? I'm seeing a new feed pop up here. It's a different state. So many people have been talking about how they didn't believe that there was enough evidence, but it only matters to that jury. And look, some people have watched every moment of this trial, but at the same time, us as being members of the public, we weren't privy to everything that happened in that courtroom. A lot of stuff was redacted from public view. A lot of it due to how extremely visual it was and how disturbing it could be. So the jury saw everything. We, me being a reporter, you as a member of the public and someone who's very, very interested in the case, you didn't see it all. So there are certain things that the jury was able to see with their own eyes and process with with their own way that we were unable to do so. So it only comes down to those 12 jurors. Looking here at some other comments as we await any additional feeds coming up. I'm going to check one more time in oh yeah, we do have another. What is this feed that just popped up? Okay, we got a couple of feeds. Stand by here, everybody. I'm going to communicate with our team. This is just coming in to the WFLA Now Stream Center, folks. So new feeds are coming in from outside of the courthouse, and podiums have been set up. We'll get that to you right away. No one's speaking at those podiums yet. You're not missing anything. It's just all the media that has now moved their gear and got their stuff in position for press conferences. Actually quite the scene. Wish I could see if I could show it to you here in a moment. The amount of reporters and the amount of photographers and the amount of producers that are at this courthouse is pretty interesting. It's just how when a story rises to this level, when it gets that big, it's not just South Carolina media that has been covering it for years. It is not just the national media. International media attention has descended on the low country of South Carolina. And those feeds have now come up. So let's bring them in. I think we have a couple different angles here to show you. We'll hit the touchscreen here and bring in, let's go to shot number 1. Here you can see one of the many reporters that are just jockeying for position, rushing up there to get one of the spots where you can put your microphone in a position. This can get very competitive, by the way. I've been at these podiums and it can get very competitive. You don't ever, it's considered a foul to touch anyone else's microphone. So you have to move your microphone into a good position without touching anyone else's. Anyone else touches your microphone, it's not something you're... Okay, so let's listen in.
Hurry up, Jeff. Hurry. What are you going to do about taxes? Get a mic check for him.
Hey, give us a mic check.
All right, so they're doing mic checks clearly. We have a different angle, but it's the same shot. But if one of these feeds happen to go down, you have access to it here in the Stream Center. I always like backups. Backup feeds are my best friend as far as the work that we do here. So it's good to have a couple different feeds, and we'll be able to listen in as to who is speaking. You can see some of the networks and some of the outlets being represented on their respective mic flags. Let's get to some of the comments. Lesha wants to know, #HJB, what happens with the other cases if he wins appeal by some miracle? The other cases would not be impacted in the event that the remote likelihood that Alex Murdaugh were to win on an appeal. As legal analysts such as Peter Tragos have noted, the likelihood of Alex Murdaugh spending the rest of his life in prison is as close to 100% as you can get. Alex Murdaugh is going to spend the rest of his life in prison. It's as 99.999. You can tack on really as many nines as you see fit, but that's pretty much the certainty that Alex Murdaugh is going to be spending the rest of his life in prison. He'll never get to meet his grandchildren. Should Buster, of course, get married. I saw him there at the courthouse with his girlfriend. Should he ever, get married, have kids? I mean, everything will have to be done within the restrictions of the life in prison without parole sentence that he has received. Life in prison without parole times 2, the max sentence, one for Paul and one for Maggie. Reading through some of your comments. Seeing that. Yeah, a lot of folks who are saying that a juror has spoken out and that it did not take for them, the jury, very long, that they agreed within 45 minutes. I've been honed into our coverage, so I did not catch that. I mean, I saw some tweets, but I did not actually see it myself. It has been a whirlwind. Think about where we were just 24 hours ago. We were in closing arguments still. So within 24 hours, we go from closing arguments to the deliberations beginning, to deliberations being allowed to extend beyond the end of the day, 5 o'clock. Let's listen in here.
Come around the sides. Come on around. Good afternoon. Is everybody ready? Okay. We'll give it just a minute.
Can you each identify yourselves for people that have to go? Thank you.
Everybody give me a thumbs up. My name is Mark Keel, and I'm Chief of the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, otherwise known as SLED. For those of y'all in the local media, I don't do very many press conferences. I've been Chief of SLED for 12 years, and I've only done 2. The last one I did was in June of 21 to talk about significant violent crime that's just been unprecedented in our state. But today it's important for me to speak out. It's important because of the victims in this case. It's important because Maggie and Paul cannot. I want to make one thing clear to everybody. There are no winners today. I have a truly humbling responsibility as being Chief of SLED. I lead a dedicated and professional group of investigators, forensic scientists, and support personnel. A staff that work day in and day out for days just like today to bring justice for victims And today is not the end. It's the next step in a long road to justice for every person who has been victimized by Alex Murdaugh. Alex Murdaugh has now been rightfully found guilty of murdering his wife Maggie and Paul. He was found guilty because he was guilty. And as one of the witnesses said, Paul was a little detective. This case serves notice to anyone who aided or assisted Alex Murdaugh in committing any crime, that justice will be sought. This was an incredible effort by SLED, our local and federal partners, and our partners at the Attorney General's office. And I want to thank Attorney General Wilson and all of his prosecutors, paralegals, and all of his support personnel as well. They did a fantastic job. The agents and prosecutors who worked this case have sacrificed countless moments from their own families to ensure that a person responsible for the murders of Maggie and Paul was fairly tried and brought to justice. The people who work this case do it because they are called to serve. They do it to bring a voice to the voiceless. And they're dedicated public servants, and for that I'm grateful. SLED agents have worked tirelessly for the past 21 months to ensure justice was served for Maggie and Paul. It is impossible for most people to understand the countless hours of hard work that went into this case. Time away from families, missed birthdays, missed holidays. And it is all done under constant scrutiny, constant pressure. I want these folks standing behind me and around me to know how incredibly proud I am of them as Chief of SLED. I believe firmly in this criminal justice system that we have, and I believe in the rights of an accused to have a fair trial. That is why I have remained silent from beginning this case until now. Again today, I'm here to provide a voice for Maggie and Paul. I'm here to recognize the heart-wrenching journey that family and friends of Maggie and Paul have endured. And I'm here to support and thank again this incredible team of agents, forensic scientists, support personnel that work at SLED and that worked on this case. Yesterday and today, justice has been served. Thank you.
The chief of SLED, the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, speaking here at the podium outside of the Colton County Courthouse. And we anticipate more press conferences as our live coverage here continues of Alex Murdaugh being sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Interesting how SLED has been called into question and how the work by, just really the work by the responding law enforcement officers, how the work was conducted at the crime scene itself, the evidence gathering, how much that has been a point of discussion as to whether or not it was a thorough of enough job, how flawed of a job that it was. And of course, if flawed, why so flawed? If there were inadequacies in the performance of the law enforcement responding teams that were there at Moselle that night, then why did those inadequacies exist? You heard there the head of SLED commend those who have been working tirelessly as part of this investigation, and of course him being in agreement with the jury's verdict. As we await more press conferences here from outside the courthouse, JB here with you live on WFLA Now. We'll get to some more of your comments or questions. Elizabeth says, #HJB, the criminals always think that they are the smartest one in the room. Pride comes before the fall. I think that there's also, I think, Elizabeth, it goes beyond this too. I mean, beyond just criminals. When you're talking about someone who has been at the center of the legal system, as far as quite literally having your grandfather's portrait hanging in this courtroom, and your family having this legacy and being so involved in legal culture and in the legal system itself in this region of the country, there might have been this feeling of invincibility that came over the Murdoch family. This feeling that no matter what happens, we'll always be able to find a way out, make a phone call, and find yourself just stacking the deck in your favor, given how, of course, Alex Murdaugh's family has been so integral in as far as the legal system in South Carolina, in the low country of South Carolina. Phil's comment is simple. It's 2 words: justice served. Scuffed Gamer saying, great job. I'm not sure who the great job is for. But great job is the comment here. This is what I asked Laurel to Peter Tragos. Do you think if Alex would have been, if he had stayed off the stand, would this verdict have been different? There was the Snapchat video too. The admission that he was there, the admission that he had lied. The Snapchat video is extremely important. It's extremely important. And you have to wonder if a juror, if that was the final piece, if when they looked at all the evidence laid out on a table, or a proverbial table, if you will, and they thought about it, if that Snapchat video was, the number one piece of evidence that cemented it in their minds. Got to wonder if it came up during those 45 minutes, those key 45 minutes of deliberations as well. You're welcome, Laurel. Liz, #HJB, this family's dynasty of power has ended, and a lot of questions have been raised that now have to be investigated. What's interesting? I was thinking about this on the drive in this morning. I was thinking about how ready South Carolina must be, both in Carlton County and Hampton County, in this region of the southeastern United States, how ready they are to move on from this. That's what I was really thinking about this morning. This is a court case that has brought the worst kind of attention to South Carolina and to these counties. There's some look. If you watch the documentaries, and I did, it's very clear, and this can be said almost really of any county in the country. There's some really good people there, some really good people who were taken advantage of. There were some really good people who make an honest living, who got schemed out of their money. There's a lot of good, honest people that have nothing to do with the Murdochs at all, who are just sick and tired of all the media attention, all the headlines, all the press, and who just want their lives back without there being this stranglehold, if you will, from one family, commanding all of this attention and really over the years yielding all of this influence. So I was thinking about the average Joe, the average Jane, the average person in South Carolina, families must be just ready. Like, this is the first day of the rest of their lives as far as putting this behind them and getting. Now, that's for a lot of folks, but that doesn't include all the victims of the fraud, of the financial crimes that Alex Murdaugh has confessed to. So this isn't over yet, but it certainly is a massive part of the healing process. The coping mechanisms that will now be put into place by the community at large to move on from this and to, in time, wipe the slate clean and do so without Alex Murdoch being a free person, a free man. Gail wants to know, is there any chance for parole? No. Even if there was, let's just play this game for a second. Even if there was a chance for parole, will the parole board entertain letting Alex Murdoch out, given the mountain of litigation that is also staring him in the face? He is spending the rest of his, barring appeal, but even if he appealed, and even if the appeal threw this out, you heard Peter earlier talk about how you could make the argument that this case, that this trial wasn't really even necessary to put Alex Murdoch behind bars for the rest of his life. So this just even further cements that Alex Murdoch is spending the rest of his life in prison, even with parole. Even if he had been granted the opportunity for parole down the line, 20, 30 years from now, or something to that effect, even if they had appealed and won, there's the chances of him getting out non-existent. Soul says, have you heard how? Yeah, I saw somebody in the comment section claim that Banfield's reporting, "I'm sorry, I love you" to Buster. And that sorry is not an admission of guilt, by the way. Let's make that clear. If he said the words, "I'm sorry," he's just sorry for what his son has had to endure. That's how that could be interpreted. This is an excellent question. It's a really great question, Abby. Can the fraud victims come together and ask for a singular trial? I'm sure Judge Newman would appreciate the opportunity to, but I highly doubt it, given the charges are different, the circumstances pertaining to each victim are so different, and while it's great legal, Abby, that's an excellent question. I would imagine that there would be some consolidation possible to pool certain victims together or certain charges together. You're not going to have 99 trials for 99 charges. That's not going to happen. There's obviously going to be an attempt to consolidate it down as much as possible so that we're not repeating the alphabet, so to speak, over and over and over again. But each victim deserves their day in court. But if the victims were to agree to a consolidation of the charges, a consolidation of the legal process, I don't know. That's really interesting. That's a fascinating question. And I do not know the answer. I'm sorry, I'm not an attorney. M.A. Bryant, #HJB, the Murdoch family used to be proudly thrown around. Now it brings shame. That's the opinion of M.A. But an opinion I'm sure that is a lot of folks share. Yeah, people asking what's next for Buster. I don't know. I do not know. Lita wants to know if Peter will be back on today. I would love to just have Peter on a permanent retainer. It'd be great. But Peter has his own channel, and Peter does his own work. Really appreciate some of the kind comments here today. No, Peter, I encourage people who really enjoy Peter's commentary. I really do. It's always great because Peter and I have worked together for a while now, and go give him a follow on the Lawyer You Know channel. Some of his reviews are of particular court proceedings are fascinating. He does really good work on his channel. Ashley Diard, #HJB, were you surprised that there were no victim impact statements? It took me by surprise that not one person wanted to address the court. I'm going to give everyone a bit of my 2 cents here. Victim impact statements are obviously limited in scope due to the 2 primary victims, of course, being murder victims in this case, while others were significantly and adversely impacted and can be labeled as victims, of course. There's no doubt that a certain amount of fatigue has settled in this case. Again, not just going back to last month as this has played out in the courtroom before our very eyes, but going back, really since June 7th night. So I wasn't all that surprised by there not being any victim impact statements. I think there was this feeling, if you will, that it was Judge Newman's opportunity to give out a sentence, and that's just my 2 cents on it. I mean, I think some victim impact statements would have been, of course, they're always encouraged throughout the sentencing process. Sometimes victim impact statements can play out over weeks. However, in this case, I think that there was this anticipation for just getting to the sentence itself. I think there was. Lisa, I see your question. I don't want to just because of the nature of the question. I'm just going to say, as far as Alex Murdaugh's time behind bars now, if he's going to be placed on watch for any behavior where he could be a threat to himself, a detriment to himself. Of course, he is without a doubt, a high-profile inmate, and the respective correctional facility is going to do everything that they can to ensure his safety while behind bars, safety from himself and safety from others. Everything will be done to ensure that that there is no event that occurs while behind bars. Elizabeth, Creighton Waters, Richard Dreyfuss lookalike. That's interesting. I guess there is some. Yeah, there's a bit of a. Creighton Waters does look a bit like Richard Dreyfuss. I'll agree with that. Would he write a book? That's up to him. it's really up to him. That's I can't even begin to one. I mean, look, he has his career still very much, other cases on his calendar on the docket right now. So his work, as far as his career, is not done, but maybe one day when his career is all said and done, will he look to share more of what this experience was like for him? That's up to him. Completely up to him. It's interesting. This podium has been set up for a little while, and still no other press conferences. So this is the lone spot for where press conferences and where, the opportunity to address the media, where that would happen, and nothing as of right now. So we're gonna stay with this live, folks. But that might be it. After, of course, all the press conferences.
Test
all
1,
the press
2,
conferences
3.
there were last night.
Waiting for press conference. No. Cool. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see here. Tiffany, #KJB, why is there the need for a trial here, or a trial hearing when Alex admitted to stealing all of the money from those victims? Every victim has the right to their day in court, even if there's a confession. Even if I confess to a crime and there's a victim, the victim is entitled to their day in court. Whether or not that person, the defendant in the case, pleads guilty or not guilty, the victim is entitled to their day in court, in front of a judge, with the defendant present. So it doesn't work like that. Now, in a civil case, in a civil lawsuit, if there's always the opportunity to settle out of court, there are other circumstances where it wouldn't reach a courtroom floor, but those victims are entitled to their day, and where it is clearly established that they have been a victim of a terrible crime, and so that is still going to happen. Alex Murdaugh's he will be back in a courtroom at some point in the future, perhaps many times. James, #KJB, do you believe the Netflix documentary affected the trial anyway? I actually think that we've now lost all feeds. That's very interesting. We'll see if they fire those feeds back up. Oh no, it's back up. Maybe I think they were just new battery. It's usually what happens when the feed goes down for a little bit. Do you believe the Netflix documentary affected the trial in any way? No. But I think you could insert HBO Max documentary here, and that would be more of a poignant question because it came out way ahead of time, way before the trial. When did that documentary come out? I know the Netflix one was very recent. But when did it actually get released? But here's the trailer. And the trailer says...
Y'all want to get your mics? We got to take the podium.
Okay, here we go. New press conference. We'll come back to this in a bit here, but...
It's right here.
Which one is it?
It was right here.
This is it, I think. No, that ain't it.
It was right
To wrap that up, I believe it was October of last year, the HBO Max documentary. More on that when we come back. Listening in for the next press conferences here live from the courthouse in South Carolina.
Are they in there now?
They're in there now.
Oh, they must be.
Well, not me. Test. Am I getting hotter or colder? Hot, cold. I'm hot right here. That it?
He's in the level. He's here.
Oh.
He's here.
Test, you're right there? All right. There you go. It is, but they've just gone back in, and I heard a little chatter.
Check, check, check. Check 1, 2, check 1, 2. Check 1, 2, check 1, 2. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
So there was a group there preparing to deliver some remarks as far as their press conference. They have gone back inside. It appears that they were just getting ready to speak. So we'll stay with this. But really, back to James. No, and if the HBO Max documentary affected the trial in any way, just maybe with the amount of publicity that it received as far as the trial goes, this was very much on our radar, documentary or not. This was very much on our radar. Reminder: Alex Murdoch was arrested in Florida when he was apprehended. He was in Central Florida. I don't remember exactly where he was. That's in my notes somewhere. But he was down here in Florida, and then of course extradited, back to South Carolina. So this case has been very much on our radar, but as far as the documentaries go, Netflix, HBO Max, what have you, just bringing more attention to the case. But I think Peter's comments are really excellent as far as what he pointed out. The documentaries are going to do their very best to get both sides. It's part of the nature of documentary studies, and part of the nature of documentary filmmaking is always to examine the subject matter from as many different viewpoints as possible and try to come to a fair perspective, usually trying to come to a fair perspective on the subject matter. But that's not always the case. And sometimes things can be sensationalized. Sometimes things can be extremely skewed and told from one point of view more than another. How many times have you seen a documentary where you will hear at great length somebody go on and on and on about a particular atrocity that has been committed, and then at the very end of the documentary you will see what's called a title card, and someone will say, oh, we reached out to so-and-so for comment, they did not want to participate in the interview, they sent us this, and it's just a title card where the entirety of the documentary is shining light on something, and then the person given the opportunity to defend themselves has done so with really just a title card at the end. And while you could make the case that the person really was given the opportunity to do an interview, it's just even further proof that you're looking at it and you're examining the facts and you're examining or the claim of fact from one particular side. And so our legal system allows us to get both sides in one place, get the prosecution on one side, the defense on the other, and to have it be a fair and open process, rather than with a documentary where, look, a documentary filmmaker is not held to the same standards that a judge is, that the legal system is. So you have to be really careful with documentaries, because of course they're designed to capture your attention. Their chief objective is to make money, and they make money by getting your attention, and they get your attention, of course, by with headlines and particular interviews and particular evidence. And it just got to be really careful with documentaries. Some are superb, some are excellent, some are okay, some are terrible. Just be mindful of how, really try to examine a documentary for what it is. It's a private entity with the purpose of attracting attention and of course making money, trying to shed light on a topic, but they are not held to the same standards as the American legal system. So please keep that in mind when you watch these documentaries in the future. Shona, as far as the O.J. Simpson stuff, I have not got caught up on that yet. I've seen some of the I have seen some of the videos or some snapshots of the videos that he has done. I don't want to comment on them because I haven't watched them and really given that much attention yet. Someone is saying that the press conference is going to be at about 11:45. That gives us a lot of time to chat. Yeah. Let's see here. Alex Tejada, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. He is a reporter with ABC Columbia, and he says that defense attorney Dick Harpootlian will be holding a press conference at 11:45. Okay. Some others are saying 11:45 as well. That was one reporter that I had seen come back to the stream center. Lil Patty, just my 2 cents. Don't think Alex Murdoch was given a fair trial given the venue and jury being citizens of Hampton County, SLED dropping the ball. Look, as far as the jurisdiction, I think that every opportunity that was fair to both attorneys for both sides had a say in the process as far as how this trial was going to be conducted. Each side was able to present their case. We have an outcome, and if there's any flaws in the process whatsoever, let's adjust my microphone here a little bit, that will be heard in appeals, Patty. So we'll see. We will see. Soul says, hashtag AJB, anything new with the Gabby Petito case? Have they released any of the notebook? Yeah, an opportunity. We have no feeds now, so it's just us chatting. We're waiting for the 11:45 press conference, so this is an opportunity for us to just do a little bit more of an informal chat, an informal Q&A over the next half hour or so. Yeah, there is an update with Gabby Petito as things progress towards the civil trial taking place later this year. Laundry family attorney Stephen Bertolino has filed his motion to dismiss being added as a co-defendant in the lawsuit that has been filed against the Laundries by Gabby Petito's parents. Stephen Bertolino now has a hearing that has been scheduled by Judge Danielle Brewer in Sarasota County Circuit Court. The exact day eludes me. I believe it's in May. I'll tweet it out. So that's the latest there. But people asking what's a big trial on the horizon? I can just tell you that when we have the parents of Gabby Petito and the parents of Brian Laundrie in the same courtroom at the same time, that is going to attract a gargantuan amount of attention. I mean, it's going to be significant. Taco wants to know, hashtag KJB, is there any information or rumblings about how Maggie's family feels about Alex or where they stand? I just know that I, for one, am very, very curious as to whether or not they are going to have their voices heard now that this process is over. And look, folks, when the dust settles with a court case like this, there oftentimes, I'm just speaking in generalities here, so please remember that as far as the context for what I'm saying here. There's oftentimes this feeling of where a family wants to have their voice heard and put it to rest. Speak, have their voices heard, and then move on with their life. That sometimes speaking to the media and doing an interview can be a form of closure. So what you will oftentimes see, and it's already been happening, but I can guarantee you that it's going to be happening in the weeks and months ahead, that Maggie's family will be approached by every major network, by every local news station and news outlet for an interview, and be given the opportunity to share what this experience has been like for them. And really, and why would they agree to do that? Well, closure. An opportunity for closure. And so I'm really intrigued by the possibility of Maggie's family speaking out and having their voices heard. So we'll see. We'll keep you posted on that. If we hear anything about that, of course, we'll share it to WFLA.com. Matt, #KJB, being from the UK and not completely in the know, what is the difference between a state prison and a federal prison? Federal prison is for federal inmates, and a state prison is for state inmates. And federal prisons they're completely different systems and different jurisdictions, manned by different staff and for different they're quite different. But what it really comes down to is that a state prison is designed to house the inmates for a particular state and are governed by the state. Meanwhile, a federal prison is run by the United States government with federal funding, and so and with federal inmates. That's really just kind of a top level view, if you will, of what makes them different. We are going to be staying on stream until the 11:45. Really, we're going to be staying on stream as long as we have press conferences, but these press conferences are not going to be going on all day. So the next one is at 11:45, as we understand it. Dick Harpootlian is going to be speaking, and probably his final chance to speak at the courthouse as far as this trial goes, unless, look, there's always the likelihood of an appeal. But thank you to our great moderators. I hope our moderators doing great out there today. YouTube Live moderators, Lynn, Brittany, Team Brittany. I see Michelle in here. I think I saw Bug Love too. Appreciate you. Guys, help me do so much. So thank you. And you know, Maggie's family, it's not just about speaking for Maggie, it's also about speaking for Paul. If they ever do decide to speak, do an interview of some kind, it's not just for Maggie, it's also for Paul too, who's very much part of that family. And Buster being the surviving Murdoch who now, look, the entire rest of his life ahead of him with his father in prison and his mother and brother murdered. It's extremely tragic. Will Buster speak? Another question. Talk about a question. Jennifer Henry. #HeyJB. How will a man who has had a life like Alex Murdoch adjust to being in prison with no chance of ever getting out? Well, Alex has been in jail for some time now. And so it's just now it's just a change in mentality, knowing that you're never going to be a free person ever again. And the impact that that makes on a human being, I can only imagine. But Alex, let's just remind our audience, Alex gets to live the rest of his life, even though it's behind bars, he gets to live the rest of his life. Maggie and Paul were murdered. And so, without going too much farther than that, let's just keep things in context here too. But how will he adjust, being that he lived a lavish life, a life of luxury and a life of fun, a life of being able to spend money on whatever he wanted and buy whatever he wanted, and a life of excess, you could argue, to now having the most precious thing that a person has is their freedom. Their freedom and their family. And now to have that ripped from you, or in this case, have it be something that you ripped from yourself based on the jury's conviction. It's just how is he going to adjust? Here's another question. I'll take this a step further. Will Alex Murdoch ever do a jailhouse interview? Will he ever do interviews from behind bars? I thought about that till this moment. You know, we're talking about now, as far as the fallout from this. I'd love to get some questions going here, or some comments going. If Alex Murdoch did an interview from behind prison, let's say on the 1 year after this, let's say it's March 3rd, 2024. It's 1 year since he was sentenced to life in prison. And let's say that a network, I'll just insert network name here, whatever network it is, does an interview and decides to air an interview with Alex Murdoch. Would you watch? How about a poll? Should we do a poll? How about YouTube Live only? We'll do a poll here. We're going to end this one, and let's create a new poll. If Alex Murdoch were to speak from prison in an interview at some point in the future, would you watch? Oh, that's too many characters. If Alex Murdoch were to do a prison interview at some point in the future, would you watch? Yeah, that fits. Ask. The reason I ask this is because this is somebody who, by his own admission, is a liar. So there's a couple of thoughts here. Would you watch because now his fate has been decided and he has nothing else to really, everything has been really ripped away from him. He has been found guilty of murdering his wife and his son. His freedom has been taken away from him. Does that make it more likely that you would watch, or do you not want to even give him the attention because of what has transpired, what he is guilty of according to the jury and according to our legal system, what he is guilty of. And also, too, the thought could be, how could I ever believe a person who has admitted himself to lying? See, I think a lot of folks would feel this way. Carrie says, #HJB, I've heard enough from him. I think a lot of folks would feel that way. Then again, if it were a year in the future, if Alex Murdaugh were behind bars for a year and a network decided to air an interview, are you changing the channel, or are you willing to watch? Are you going to watch? Now that, let's say, a year has passed, 10 years. Let's say it was a decade. Let's say it was March 3rd, 2033. Think about that for a moment. It's crazy, right? I only hope all of us are still here in 2033. The poll results are interesting. We've got 500 votes so far, and 3/4 of you said yeah. That's just honesty. It's just an honest take. I think that if you were to insert Maggie's family in there, if Maggie's family were to do an interview at some point in the future, would you watch? I think it would be 98% or higher. Same with Buster. But with Alex, this is a man who on the national, international stage said, I'm a liar. So, I don't know. I think a lot of folks would want to know, because, okay, to this point, from If Angels, people would think if there was an interview, would Alex be pressed by if I was doing the interview with Alex Murdaugh, the first thing I would ask is, did you do it? Are you ready to are you willing to confess to your crimes? And so I think that people would want to tune in to see if Alex, given everything that has transpired, would have had a change of heart, if you will. But wouldn't Alex have a change of heart in the future? Again, there are some people who still believe that he is not the one who pulled the trigger. There are people out there that believe that. Doesn't matter who does or doesn't believe it, because, of course, you have the jury that unanimously felt that he is the one guilty of pulling the trigger and murdering his wife and son. But, Is this, wow. Caroline says Mallory Beach was found on this day in 2019. Karma? Is that, yeah, I'd love to find the news report of that. Because if, I think there's some people out there who really do believe in karma and really do believe in certain cosmic powers within the universe aligning in certain ways. In moments like these. But that's very interesting. Karen says, no, I wouldn't. Just more pathetic lies. Same as Pamela Smart from New Hampshire. Always, #KJB, when would the appeal be? It's a great question. It depends on the court's calendar and the log of court proceedings. MZ Liz, Ms. Liz, #KJB, I will not waste my time listening to a proven liar. Not even proven, Ms. Liz. It's proven and it's admitted. I can't think of a trial off the top of my head where somebody who was accused of murder took the stand in their own defense and the strategy was, I lied. I'm a liar. I mean, really what Alex Murdaugh was communicating was, I lied about all of this, but I didn't kill my wife and kid. I did not kill my wife and son. I'm a liar in other respects, but this This, you have to believe me. This, I'm telling the truth. The last time somebody in a trial of this scope, size, magnitude, and the level of attention this has received for somebody to not only let's not forget, just to have a defendant in a case like this take the stand is monumental and extremely uncommon. You normally do not have the sole defendant in the case taking the stand in their own defense. That's a relatively uncommon thing. But then to go up there and admit to lying in certain respects, yeah, I can't think of many comparable examples. Carrie is of the belief that if the Snapchat video wasn't there, it would have been a hung jury. Interesting. We're going to end the poll at how many votes did we get? Where'd it go? I just had it. Did we get to was it 1,000 or so? Maybe less. Come on, YouTube. It was 75-25 as far as the poll results. Reading your comments here, everybody. Just an opinion from one of our commenters, Soul, saying #HJB Alex didn't say that he didn't kill or murder. He said he wouldn't hurt them. That was the biggest tell. Interesting. Interesting that you see it that way. Oh, you know what we haven't talked about? Judge Newman pointed out the severe opioid problem that Alex Murdoch had. This was a very distinct moment over the course of the sentencing. As we now have another feedback. These feeds are just jumping all over the place. But that's why we have the Stream Center, so that we could go to feeds as they come up. How interesting was it when Judge Newman, in essence, said something to the effect of how Alex Murdoch, that the person standing here today isn't, might not think that they were the killer, but they're still the individual who did it, implying that there was a monster within Alex Murdoch based on his addiction to opioids. That's something that a fraction or a part of his psyche, if you will, a part of his brain is guilty of this, of taking over and committing these crimes, but that the person standing in front of him today was not that same person, implying that something happened on that night where he was triggered into pulling the trigger.
I'm here at the mic. Are you still hearing the hum?
As we have some mic checks, put this off for a second. I thought that was very interesting, but it doesn't clear your name. It doesn't exonerate you. If somebody has a drug-fueled split personality where they have their Jekyll and Hyde, they have their good and their bad side, and their bad side comes out and says, I was high on opioids, I was addicted, and this violent addiction to drugs caused me to do something violent. That's not an applicable defense, is what Judge Newman is pointing to. You are still the individual who is guilty of these crimes, regardless of whether or not you were going through, an extreme divide within your own mind, an extreme divide within your own personality and with your own behaviors. I just thought that was such an interesting moment, because he said I believe he said something to the effect of the individual is, still did this. And yeah, Sharona, I'm glad you brought this up too. #AJB. Judge Newman also said many people have been sentenced to death in that same courthouse for lesser offenses. I found that interesting, as did I. Very interesting. His sentencing, we all read into body language when it comes to court cases, right? All of us do. None more than Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, even Amber Heard raising a single eyebrow for a moment was something that got attention, or Johnny Depp with the slightest twitch that led to a smirk on the side of his face, anything. So we're now, it's customary now for us as observers when it comes to court cases like this to microanalyze every facial expression. And I thought Judge Newman's demeanor as he delivered the sentence was very interesting. It was introspective, but he was also scanning the room. He was looking around a lot, almost where he was still searching for the right words to say, pausing a lot to ensure that he was concise in his thoughts, even though it was played out over the course of 20 or so minutes. I thought that his demeanor was in and of itself very interesting. Reading some others. Yeah, Griffin, I have not watched the interview. Apparently, the ABC News interview with one of the jurors. I haven't seen it yet. So think about what's unfolded over the last 24 hours. Again, 24 hours, we're still in closing arguments yesterday. Pretty wild how things can all develop in just a single day. Oh, Ken, that's very interesting. I'll have to research that. If you would send that my way, I'd love to read about it. Brad wonders if Alex Murdoch had leaned more into the drug addiction from the very start. But if you use the drug addiction more, you have to... I would imagine that a defense attorney is going to have to warn with caution that using that as more of a defense, you're communicating that as part of your case that you're dealing with somebody who is a highly unpredictable and volatile individual, and that even leads more into the prosecution's case that we're dealing with somebody who was violently unpredictable because of drugs or otherwise. So I'm not sure. But you'd have to be careful. All these strategies were carefully thought out and planned. And the jury thought the state had the better case. Or rather, the jury thought that the facts were on the state's side. We're now about 3 minutes away from this next press conference, a press conference that is going to be, we're going to see Dick Harpootlian, the head of Alex Murdaugh's defense team. That's going to be coming up here momentarily if you're just joining us. Great question. Linda Ward, what's going to happen to Alex's properties, his assets? How does Buster make money? Buster's story is that could almost be separated into a separate question. How Buster, let's start with that real quick. As far as Buster goes, there's no doubt, based on covering this from a distance, I'm here in Tampa Bay, but in covering this and reading as much as I have on the Murdoch family, while the stain on this family will probably never come out, there are still people very close with the Murdochs. And still the family in and of itself, remove Alex from the equation, just the other members of the Murdoch family, there are still a lot of friends, sympathizers, allies, if you will, of the Murdoch family. And Buster will be given an opportunity to enter into a career, and his life is forever impacted, and the trajectory of his life is absolutely adversely impacted. However, Buster will be given the opportunity to make a living in his own way. There's very little doubt of that. As far as Alex's properties and his assets, those properties, those assets, how they factor in to the pending financial, court cases, the financial crimes, and how that is a fascinating question now. All of his assets, everything in the Alex Murdaugh estate, and how that is handled from a legal standpoint, given that there's this pile of 99 charges sitting on a table somewhere ready to be heard in a court of law. That is an extremely complex question that a very specific attorney will have to. That might be a good stream opportunity, to tell you the truth. Someone who has experience with handling the estates of a deceased person, not handling the estates of a deceased person, handling the estates of a convicted person. How that's all going to be carried out in the future. It's a very complex case. So I don't even want to try to answer this question, but it might be an opportunity for us to figure out if there's another stream opportunity here with that. It's a great question, Linda. Reading some other questions here, folks. Elizabeth says, this Aussie has had some late nights with these American law courts, Johnny and Amber, and this trial. Like the judge said, the jury had an education in human nature. Each juror has their own story, but the fact that they all came to the same decision, really in a totality of less than 3.5 hours, speaks volumes, given that the case was so complex and spanned such a long period of time. Let's bring up audio. Now let's go live here, full screen. I'll pay attention to more of your comments, but with the time now being 11:47, we know that at any moment Dick Harpootlian is going to be coming out to address the press, and we'll be listening in here live on WFLA now. Tiana says, especially because the property was also Maggie's, will it go to her family first? #HJB. That's a great question. How the assets get divided and whether or not they are frozen. Are those assets frozen pending the outcome of the remaining lawsuits? That's something I'll have to do a little bit more digging on. But Maggie is, of course, attached to the estate, as is Buster, as is Paul. So her family, you know, I'm sure is part of the equation. Buster, a very big part of the estate, no doubt. But how about those victims, too? A lot of questions there. I'm just going to put up Scooter's comment because it's fascinating to me that a Snapchat video, which is Snapchat has really become a platform that is uniquely used by a younger demographic. There was a time when Snapchat was gaining popularity and everyone was using it, and then it kind of became more of a niche platform for, you know, folks, teenagers and maybe folks in their early 20s. Social media platforms go through phases and go through different chapters where certain people are using them. And Snapchat has really become the younger generation's platform. And it's so interesting that Snapchat and the fact that there was a time when Snapchat was discussed as a potential social network that could be done away with, that Snapchat was going to no longer be profitable and was going to just kind of fade away into non-existence. There was a time when Snapchat was losing users to the point where it was not considered a cool in platform, if you will, anymore. So the fact that the Snapchat video exists is just look, there will be many news stories, documentaries, various reports about how this outcome was reached. And you can't really tell the story without the Snapchat video. I'm seeing that some people have already been sharing some details about the estate's future. Let me be clear. I'm not just talking about the Mizell property. I'm talking about all of Alex Murdaugh's assets. A person's assets are more than just the property that they own. So when I say their estate, that term can be interpreted differently. I'm talking about his legal estate, the totality of his assets, and who is entitled to the totality of those assets and how it's divided.
Testing one, do you hear that? Got it? It's right there, do you have it?
Folks, I'm going to be stepping away from the microphone for just a moment. We're here live across all platforms on WFLA Now. Some information here from one of our moderators, Lynn, sharing with me in our YouTube live comment section that the courts have ordered all of Murdaugh's assets are to be controlled by 2 co-receivers, attorneys in South Carolina, Jonathan Thomas Lay and Peter McCoy. And per one of our great moderators on YouTube Live, Lynn, thank you for the information. Awaiting Dick Harpootlian, Alex Murdaugh's defense attorneys speaking here outside the courthouse after Alex Murdaugh sentenced to life in prison in South Carolina.
like 5 minutes out, but I just want to make sure everyone's set up. Okay.
A 5-minute warning. You can hear here again.
Huh?
Defense attorneys for Alex Murdoch will be speaking here
the
live.
The whole team will be up here. So we'll go down the line. We'll introduce everybody, and then hand raise, and Dick and Jim will call on you. Cool. Okay. Cool.
supposed to introduce everybody?
Yes.
Okay. So y'all spread out behind me. Where is everybody? Good afternoon, afternoon. I'm Dick Harpootlian. This is Jim Griffin. That's Emily Dale. That's Maggie Fox. That's Holly Miller. And this is Phil Barber. We are Alec Murdaugh's defense team. We're able to answer your questions. We're not going to make a statement. I know y'all don't want one. So, anybody got a question?
Do you think it was a mistake to put Alex Murdoch on the stand?
No. Next.
Mr. Harpootlian, why did you object to that juror being dismissed yesterday?
Why didn't I?
Why didn't you?
Well, for two reasons. One, she admitted she talked to other people about the case, but not specifically. But technically, I think the judge had leeway to excuse her, but she clearly, and after we interviewed her back in chambers, in my mind, had not made up her mind. And I thought that was important.
Do you think she would have held your case?
I don't know. She didn't express an opinion to us. She said she was open. She had made up her mind.
Mr. Harpootlian, the defense has made a great deal of points about SLED and their handling of the investigation. For your position in the Senate, do you feel there's an opportunity to address that from a legislative standpoint?
I think there were significant issues, but I won't be addressing that in the Senate unless it comes up in a bill. I'm not going to mix this role with my role as a senator. I would not do that.
Why do you think that the prosecutors didn't seek the death penalty in this case? And what do you make about the judge's comments after the verdict that he agreed with the jurors?
Go ahead.
You need death penalty.
What now?
Death penalty question.
What was the question again? I'm sorry.
Why didn't they seek the death penalty?
Well, you know, I'm somebody that's prosecuted and defended a bunch of death penalty cases, and clearly, and you never do it in a circumstantial case. Because you're not. 99 times out of 100, a jury's not going to sentence somebody to death without I saw him do it, he confessed, or, you know, great forensic evidence at the minimum. They had none of that here. Secondly, in a death penalty case, it gives us the ability to individually voir dire jurors, which would have been very helpful here. And the prosecution obviously didn't want that. So I don't disagree with, I mean, if I'd been prosecuting this case, I probably wouldn't have brought it, but based on, you know, what we heard was presented to the Colleton County Grand Jury by Detective Owen that Jim crossed, blood spatter that didn't exist, testimony about guns that was wrong. I mean, I can go through the litany with you. Going back to his question, I think SLED needs to do some self-examination on the forensic processing. They did not. I mean, one of the things we complained about was that Maggie's phone would have had all her GPS data on it if they processed it within 5 days, and they because they didn't, the GPS data got overridden. I mean, it was just one, which would have been helpful to Alec. It's fingerprints, footprints, and all kinds of forensic things that weren't done. So, what was the question about the judges?
What did you make about the judge's comments after the verdict? Did he agree with it? Thought it was the right conclusion?
He's entitled to his opinion.
Mr. Harpootlian, can you expect an appeal anytime soon?
10 days, we'll be filing an appeal.
What do you believe the strongest ground for an appeal are?
What'd you say?
What do you believe the strongest grounds for an appeal are?
You know, it was the admission of all the financial crime evidence, and that was offered up, you know, as evidence of motive, that because he was confronted about one financial transaction involving attorney's fees by the chief accountant of the law firm, and that was being offered as motive for why he would go home and kill his wife and son, which we thought was illogical and ludicrous, and there really was no evidence linking one to the other, and we did not think it should come in. Not only did that come in, but every other financial misdeed that they could bring in over the last 10 or 15 years was allowed in, and we think that we strongly objected. We respect the judge's decision, but we believe that was an erroneous decision, and we believe that the judge was somewhat misled, because at the conclusion of the case, when Mr. Metters is up on his rebuttal argument in front of the jury, he says to the jury, oh, forget about all that motive evidence. We don't have to prove motive. We just have to prove malice, which is right. But why did they go to all the effort to prove motive when at the end they say, you don't have to believe us on our motive theory, but by then they had cast Alec as a despicable human being, and that was the reason they offered it in the first place. And we think the appellate courts will take a strong look at that. We feel like that is a very solid ground for an appeal, and we're going to pursue that.
Looking back at the last 6 weeks, long trial, would you guys do anything different in the last 6 weeks? How you handled
No.
anything in this trial?
No. I mean, look, once the judge, first of all, we believe if the judge was going to let that stuff in, it should have been limited to the Ferris case, which is what they were asking him about on Monday on the fee. Number two, Tinsley, the person that made the motion to compel to be heard on Thursday, Dawes Cook, Alex's lawyer, both agreed there wasn't going to be any storm or Armageddon or anything that was going to happen that Thursday. The judge might have issued an order, which months down the line might have posed a problem. So once they got that character in it, character information is he's a thief, he's a liar, then it dictated this jury had to think he was a despicable human being and not to be believed. So it was about character, it wasn't about motive. So as a result, our options were limited. Should he take the stand? Well, you know, we debated that. He always wanted to take the stand, but once that information was in, I mean, if he had to take the stand to explain the kennel video, the lie, if you will. He had to, but he had no credibility. His credibility had been stripped away by the financial misdeeds. Yes.
How is Buster doing, and why did he choose not to speak at the sentencing?
We could have had Mother Teresa up there speaking on behalf of Alec at sentencing. I mean, he was getting a double life sentence. That was expected. I mean, this is Judge Newman. He's a very stringent punisher when it comes to crimes and sentences. I mean, that was never in dispute. And so for Buster to get up and speak on his dad's behalf would not have made a difference. And why do you want to put that kid through more trauma than anybody that we can imagine has ever been through?
Have his feelings about his dad changed at all in the trial?
What's that?
Have his feelings about his dad changed at all?
You know, I can't speak to Buster's feelings. I can tell you this. There was a lot of effort by the state to convince the family that Alec is the murderer. The family came to trial every day for 6 weeks expecting to hear proof positive that he killed Maggie and Paul, something that they had not heard before. After 6 weeks of trial, they came away more convinced that he did not do this, and they steadfastly in his camp and support him, and that's where they stand.
What's next for Alex?
Well, Alex will be leaving shortly to go to Columbia to R&E, it's called, where he'll be at the South Carolina Department of Corrections. He'll be evaluated. That's about a 30-day process, and then he'll be sent to wherever the correctional facility that they assign him to.
Would he ask for any special security measures for him?
No, I don't think. Alec was not optimistic that with all of the scrutiny and press and all of his bad acts being out in the public, in the world, media domain, that he could get, a jury to put out all the noise and just focus on the murder. And so coming in, he was somewhat pessimistic. He became optimistic as we got through the process, but I got to tell you, and all you reporters, you know the whole story, I'm sure. And if you're sitting on that jury, they heard everything that would be in an HBO documentary, a Netflix documentary about the Murdoch family dynasty downfall, except the Stephen Smith matter. I mean, so we were hoping to get a jury to put all, that could ignore the noise, focus on the murder, and we ended up trying a case that they could have watched on Netflix.
Does your legal team have any regrets about the way that you guys performed in this trial? Do you feel like you did? Do you feel like you were outmatched in closing arguments?
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, not outmatched. I mean, look, they won this case the day the judge bought into letting them put every piece of, stealing from kids who lost their mother, from somebody with pancreatic cancer, somebody that's a paraplegic. I mean, all of that 2.5 weeks, by the time they got done with it, it didn't matter about final argument. It didn't matter about what we put up. They would never, ever, ever acquit him after that. Last question.
What your grounds for appeal will be? You said it's going to be 10 days. Can you lay out your arguments on that?
We'll file something, not in 10 days, but we'll file a notice of intention to appeal. Then we've got 30 days, I think, to file a brief.
Yeah, so you file the notice within 10 days. You got to get a transcript.
Oh, that'll take a while.
That'll take months before they type up everything, and then we start briefing.
Are you all going to handle the appeal?
Yes.
And argue it in the Court of Appeals of the Supreme Court?
And the U.S. Supreme Court.
And the U.S. Supreme Court if necessary. That's correct.
What's the federal issue?
Doyle.
Oh, there's a huge federal issue. That's why I got so animated, and the judge told me to sit down. And part of the trial is the state eliciting or asking questions of Alec about why he did not come forward and tell law enforcement where he was at the time of the kennel video. And that was after he was arrested, and there's U.S. Supreme Court cases are clear that post-arrest silence cannot be used against you. And that is a classic violation of the Fifth Amendment. And we feel strongly that if we lose at the state courts, we'll have success at the federal courts.
Can you tell us about the plea negotiations before trial?
No.
There were no plea negotiations.
Because there weren't any.
They never offered him anything.
If Alec is getting innocent, what effort are you making to find the real killer, or what effort is he making?
Not our job to find the real killer. If they had taken fingerprints, if they'd gotten footprints, if they hadn't if they'd preserved Maggie's phone with her GPS, if they had not, they misrepresented to the grand jury that they had a shirt with his blood on it, if Owen had opened his email, he says he didn't get, would have told him a year before there was no human blood on that T-shirt. It was a comedy of errors in terms of forensics on this. So, do I have faith that they would find the real killer? No.
Is Alec concerned for Buster's safety?
We don't know. What? Last question. Say that one more time.
Did you support putting Alec Murdoch on the stand?
There was no choice.
Why?
Because he had been made out to be a monster who stole from children and crippled people, and is crippled that's not a politically correct word. I'm sorry, I'm an old guy. Crippled people who had just done horrible, despicable things, and he had to try to push back on that. And if he'd let that lay without taking the stand, he was toast. Taking the stand, could he pull it off? Apparently didn't.
In hindsight, do you regret not asking for a change of venue in this case?
Not really, because we checked. We did focus groups in this case in a county way far away from here. 8 of the 10 people on the 2 focus groups knew all about this case. There was nowhere you could go that you could find. We believe you could find a jury that didn't know, hadn't watched TV, hadn't read the stuff you write or the stuff the Twitter stuff. And by the way, one of the good pieces of information now that this trial is over, Griffin can start tweeting again.
That's right.
All right, thank you guys. Thank you.
The defense team for Alex Murdaugh. Speaking here outside the Carlton County Courthouse this March 3rd, 2023, in the aftermath of the sentence that was handed out by Judge Clifton Newman of 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Awaiting confirmation or word that for any additional press conferences to be taking place from this point forward. Let's go over what we have learned in this press conference. JB here with you still live on WFLA Now. What we've learned, an appeal will be launched. They have 10 days to file that appeal. The grounds for that appeal will likely be Judge Newman's decision to allow the financial crimes that Alex Murdoch has confessed to be admissible as evidence to permit that within the scope and the purview of this trial. Interesting that we heard so much about Netflix, and I think Jim there said we ended up trying a case that was on Netflix, that there was no place that they could go within South Carolina, within their state jurisdiction, where they would find a better opportunity to try this case because of how much it had transcended.
Hey, I don't feel so bad no more.
We're hearing some. I'm hearing some chatter here. We're just going to mute that for now. Just how much it had transcended beyond just news headline into everyone talking about it. It has become part. This story had become part of the mass media cycle, and when it's permeating local headlines, state headlines, and then also as well national and international headlines, it's hard for people to escape that news and find anything and to not be aware of it. And that was something that they discovered over the course of the process, the research that was coordinated in advance of the trial. Harpootlian said that they won this, that the state won the case the day that the financial crimes were admissible because it wiped out Alex Murdaugh's credibility. And that also, too, that there was a comedy of errors from a forensic standpoint by the forensic teams, both, DNA evidence, fingerprint evidence, the lack of the footprint from the digital forensics as well, not being able to get data off of Maggie's phone in time. All of this, according to Harpootlian, not just leading to a comedy of errors, in his words, from SLED. And that they are willing to take this all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. So it is going to play out over many years, folks. This isn't something that we're going to be hearing about in headlines in the days and weeks ahead, as much as the years ahead, how it's going to play out in time. But it is going to be years of appeals, and you would imagine that Alex Murdaugh, if he continues to proclaim his innocence, then he is going to he's going to try his hand with the appeals process at whatever the highest court he can. He's just going to take it to the highest level court possible. You can hear there from his legal team, even as high as the United States Supreme Court. Folks, I'm bouncing back and forth here in the Stream Center. We're going to stay here with you live with this shot. I cannot stay on stream for too much longer, but I'm going to look here and check out some of the comments that have just come in the last few minutes. Victoria says, I was actually surprised they came back with a guilty verdict because if you study this case, SLED botched the investigation badly. And SLED's conduct has been a major point of discussion as far as this case. Caroline says that the transcendence will affect Brian Kohberger as well. Massive publicity. Of course, Brian Kohberger being the arrested suspect, the accused murderer of the 4 University of Idaho students. And we're in new territory when it comes to jury selection and finding jurors, because, look, we are more connected to the news than ever before in human history. Because for the first time in human history, news can spread within micro moments, within seconds. People around the world can learn of a news headline. It's the first time in human history that a moment in time can reach so many people, quite literally in the palms of their hands, within such a small fragment of time. We're in a completely new arena when it comes to how our legal system can remain unadulterated from mass media and from constant news distribution. It's a new world that we're living in, and how our American legal system can adapt to that is something that, you know, is going to take, I'm sure, many years to play out. But how does our legal system adapt to the fact that these cases receive so much attention at such a large scale? It comes down to Koberger. It has come down to Alex Murdaugh and so many other cases that we've covered here on stream. We are going to stay with this shot in the event that there's any other additional press conferences that arise, but I'll be hopping off stream here in just another moment. Barbara, yes, he will still be tried for the financial crimes. And yes, his comments today, or really, I'm sorry, not today, but in this trial will be undoubtedly admissible at court. EJ, hashtag HJB, sounds like a lot of money that's going to be wasted with all these appeals. That's, you know, that's one opinion, but that's why the appeals process, that's why the appellate court exists to begin with, is because if there is a chance to overturn a decision because of a flaw in the process, because of an oversight of some kind, that's why the appeals process is so important. It's not necessarily, it shouldn't necessarily be viewed as a waste of time or a waste of money. It's more of it's an opportunity for our legal system to self-correct. The appeals process is so important because if there is a problem, if a problem exists with our legal system here in this country, if a flaw has been exposed, that flaw has to be highlighted and corrected. So while it might feel like a waste of time in certain respects or a waste of money in certain respects, it's such an important foundational piece to the American legal system, the appellate court, on so many different levels, so many different appeals courts that exist in our country. And so it's an opportunity to confirm that our process is working and be mindful of that. Yeah, Victoria, yeah, 99 more charges. Folks, we have lost access to our feeds, which means that we are likely going to be wrapping up this live stream. I really appreciate everybody joining us here on WFLA Now. We do a lot of live streaming coverage for stories, of course, that stories, of course, that matter to you. Short announcement, if you will, for our stream audience. And let me see if I can get this highlighted on our screen here for just a moment, or if I can at least bring this up. Hold on, folks. I'm bringing up something that might be helpful to our audience. It's kind of new here on WFLA Now, so just give me a moment. Oh yeah. Okay. So for this is new for our moderators. Okay. Especially if you're joining us on Facebook Live, you're joining us on YouTube Live, and I'm going to put this in the comment section here in just a moment. There are two new. We realized the last time that we were on stream, we realized that we wanted to give people a more accessible way to provide us with feedback and also to stories that you think that we should be highlighting on stream. So to our moderators that are still on stream with us, this is something for you for your notes, because this is a new change, and this is hopefully going to be helpful for us here at WFLA and helpful for our audience, because people who are asking, you should try, why don't you cover this story? Or they'll say, hey, we would love a show featuring this person. Why don't we see more Josh Benson? Why don't we see more Masa Saidi? Why don't we see more Walt Buteau? People who are constantly looking for feedback. people who are asking, can we get Peter Tragos on more? Can we see more Brian Enton? All of these questions, we get feedback like this all the time. We realize that it was going to a lot of different places, and that, of course, can be can make it difficult for us to get to your comments in an organized way. So 2 new email addresses have been launched. Okay, there's WFLA Now at WFLA.com. Again, WFLA Now at WFLA.com. And that goes out to a lot of folks here. Really, the station, the department here, the news department here at WFLA that makes decisions. So if you want to give an overall feedback to the work that we're doing, or if you have a suggestion for content that we should be doing, a certain story or a certain show, or you want to see a certain person, stuff like that, shoot an email over to WFLA.com. You can always, let us know how we're doing. You can shout out certain people and let us know if you think that we need to be improving in certain respects, or if you want, or whatever you'd like. Just feedback in general to the station or suggestions. WFLA Now at WFLA.com. If you are trying to reach me directly, a new email has been launched. HeyJB at WFLA.com. If you want to get a hold of me directly and just me solely, with just more of a one-to-one kind of thing, HeyJB at WFLA.com. Just launched last week, I think, or it might have been earlier this week, actually. So 2 new email addresses. We do live streaming for you, for our audience, wherever you're joining us from, whether it's nationally, internationally, if you're here in Florida and Tampa Bay, if you're joining us. We had someone from Australia joining us earlier. I see Stephanie's in our comments section saying thank you from South Africa. We've got people joining us. We want to do right by you. If you spend a lot of time with us on stream, it really means a lot to us, and we want to do the best job possible. So whether, one more time, if you're really trying to influence the decision-making process here, if you want to make a suggestion or give feedback to how we're doing here at WFLA with our live streaming efforts, WFLA Now at WFLA.com. One more time, if you're trying to reach me directly, just me, it's HeyJB at WFLA.com. So big thank you. Michelle's noting it here in our YouTube Live comment section. We'll pin a comment on Facebook Live and TikTok Live as well. That brings me to our platforms. You can follow me at WFLAJB on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on TikTok. Those 4 platforms. And of course, always paying attention to what you guys are talking about out there, suggestions that you have for us, and the stories that we should be covering. Really, an enormous thank you to our entire audience for joining us, our moderators, and Peter Tragos, the lawyer give him a follow on his channel. He does tremendous work. And of course, we'll continue to highlight developments in the Alex Murdaugh story in the days, weeks, months, and years ahead on WFLA.com. Thank you so much for joining us, folks. You can follow me on those respective platforms. Thank you to our moderators, and we'll see you next time on WFLA Now.